Good evening, everyone. I call to order the June 26, 2023 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to silence your cell phones and electronic devices. Ms. Wagner, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Ms. Jones? Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Here.
President Lindy?
Here. Members of the public who are online and who wish to speak during hearing of the public may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. Please submit your name, your affiliation, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you would like a direct response to any question you might have. I'd like to briefly offer my gratitude to everyone from Cincinnati Public Schools who participated in Cincinnati's Pride Parade on Saturday. It's hard to articulate how much has changed in Cincinnati and within CPS on the issue of LGBTQ rights since I was a student in CPS, and want to thank everyone who participated in a wonderful showing for the district. On our agenda, we're moving to item B, which is our board priorities. I've shared before that we set these together as a group at our work session in January and decided over the course of the spring to extend them through the end of June. Given the weight of the topics that were included. I think these matter a great deal, as I've mentioned, because we as a group are saying in advance what our priorities are and leading towards them in a proactive way rather than a reactive way. We are coming to the close of this set of priorities as we near the end of June. I'm looking forward to doing a refresh over the summer to determine our most important wins for the fall. Brief update on them this evening. There has been lots of movement across the board. We're talking about our strategic plan this evening, and we're talking about updating our bylaws this evening. We also completed the superintendent's mid-year review process. Hiring and then evaluating the superintendent is one of our most important jobs as a board, and we take the district's progress as well as our shared challenges extremely seriously. Thank you for everyone's help on this front. Finally, we approved a plan for significant improvements for yellow bus transportation, and I'm hopeful that this makes a major impact for families in the fall. Superintendent, I'm not sure that we have an update this evening other than the presentations, but I thought I would check. So if we are good on item C, I will just check in with Rob. Do we have any online speakers this evening?
We do have one, Bill Collins. I'm going to invite him to come over now.
Great. And while he's doing that, I'll just share the intro here. Each speaker will have 2 minutes, and we'll direct all comments to the presiding officer. Once a request to speak has been granted, you'll be invited to enter. Please click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you'd like a direct response to any question you might have. This request is consistent with board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we do reserve the right to end that person's time. Again, each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel items. Thank you.
Mr. Collins, we do need you to accept the invite, please.
And Rob, we're still waiting for him to accept the
That's correct.
invite. Okay, and he's our only online speaker this evening?
He is.
Okay, let's give Mr. Collins just another second here to see if he does that. And then we'll invite I think we have I have one in-person speaker this evening. Just checking to see if I'm missing anybody. Okay. Bill, if you can hear us, we would love to hear from you this evening. We do need you to click, I think it's accept.
He did just join, so go ahead and unmute your mic and camera. Mr. Collins?
Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I'm so happy to be here today. The last time I spoke to this board about Bramble School was in January 2020. This time it's more fun because your repurchase of Bramble School is a done deal. Thank you. In particular, I want to thank the superintendent for having the necessary fresh eyes to recognize the full value of Bramble School. As we know, this site is so valuable because unlike the other two CPS schools in Madisonville that serve small numbers of Madisonville's youth in racially segregated classrooms, Bramble is walkable and located in a family-friendly setting. For those of you who are not familiar with Madisonville, it's a predominantly white community that's about 40% black. Historically, in essence, Madisonville and Cincinnati were both established in 1792 as the first two communities in Hamilton County. Today, as for Bramble School, its topographic advantage is that it's not located along busy streets adjacent to the 71 freeway. During the 1970s, the 71 freeway's construction compounded the horrific carving up of neighborhoods that began with the construction of the 75 freeway 15 years earlier. The beauty of the Bramble School campus is it's located along a mile-long, 45-acre creekside corridor of publicly owned parkland that abuts the Crown Paved Trail. Within Hamilton County, CPS is clearly the leader among the county's 20-plus public school districts in recognizing the opportunity that exists today to attract 21st century parents back to the city and its inner-reach suburbs. I say that because during the past 12 years, the district has already opened 7 new schools in previously closed CPS buildings, with Bramble being the 8th. Those 8 newly reopened schools are located in Carthage, Westwood, North Fairmount, Mount Auburn, Clifton, Walnut Hills, Hyde Park, and now Madisonville. Thank you for your time. During the coming weeks, I'll be sharing with you via email and at board meetings a few more thoughts on how to make Bramble School a desegregated success for the hundreds of young families living today in Madisonville and Columbia Township. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I believe that concludes our online speakers for this evening. We have one in-person speaker, which is CFT President Julie Sellers.
Good evening, members of the board. I would just like to say this evening, CFT and CFOP has ratified our 3rd year reopener, so that after your vote this evening, it will be completely finalized. This step will help CPS to recruit and retain a complete complement of staffing, and hopefully these are the steps necessary so that we do not have shortages of staff within our schools, and that all of our schools can have safe staffing levels. So we do look forward to this opportunity, and I'm hopeful, and I'm saying to the public, if you want a job in education, come to CPS. We have openings in many areas, and all of them will be in schools where you will truly be needed. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. With hearing of the public concluded, we're going to move to item E on our agenda this evening, which is approval of minutes. Is there a motion to approve the following minutes for special public meeting May 17, special meeting May 22nd, business meeting May 22nd, special meeting June 5, business meeting June 5?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any discussion on the approval of the minutes? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Minutes are approved. We're moving to item F, which are committee reports. We have 3 this evening. We're going to hear our first report from the Ad Hoc Attendance Boundaries Committee from Chair Moffitt.
Evening. Opportunity. The Ad Hoc Committee minutes are posted under Board Docs. I'm just going to summarize here. We did have a middle meeting before our official monthly meeting, which was held June the 8th. That particular discussion was to kind of sum up some concerns from the community that are still a little evident, but particularly around the Bramble School purchase, John P. Parker, Silverton, Pleasant Ridge Montessori, and then Woodford and Schroeder kind of as an addendum because they're all in the same area. So we spent a significant amount of time talking about and reassuring Pleasant Ridge Montessori that they were having an expansion. There was no interest in moving their boundaries. We had a lot of community concerns around the continual concern about Silverton being removed from magnet status. And we've had the Silverton community come out, the neighborhood community, and then also their members as well. There was a significant amount of discussion on that. There also was a request from John P. Parker and the Madisonville community to be included in the community conversations for Bramble. They would like an increased presence, and many requested to be on the LSDMC and to be included in those discussions. We did have our superintendent come and speak and clarify some concerns regarding ed choice. Again, Pleasant Ridge Montessori was concerned about that, and the superintendent clarified a couple of issues. You can read about those on the minutes. And we clarified that the ad hoc committee will sunset in December, will request to sunset in December of 2023. We are preparing some summation around what we've noticed so far and what our recommendations would be for the year that we've been in existence. Some of our consensus items are overcrowding, addressing transportation, budgets, corridors being east, west, and central, open enrollment, boundaries again for those particular schools that I mentioned, and then I think that was pretty much it for the June 8th meeting. And I submit and request for approval.
Thank you, Dr. Moffett. Are there any questions for the Ad hoc Attendance Boundaries Committee? Hearing none, we'll keep going to our next committee report, which is going to come from Chair Morosky for the Policy and Equity Committee.
Thank you, President Lindy. All three items on our very short minutes, it's like 2 pages, are all going to be discussed today. So just to tee it up and then I'll be finished. We spent the entire time talking about the bylaws once again, as to your point earlier. One of our priorities that we will hopefully turn green, at least partly tonight or mostly tonight. And then there's a piece about school uniforms that I'll address under resolutions, and then a piece about naming schools that we will address on board matters. I present the minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. With the note that we will be talking about many of those things at some length in about 30 minutes. Are there any other questions for the chair of the Policy and Equity Committee? Ms. Bolton.
I think it would be useful talking about this item, maybe to have the chair refresh then about the uniform. I know we're going to bring forward some resolution.
Sure. No, that's fine. I was going to address it during that part, but I can do it right now. The long and short of it is we have a resolution just codifying what's already been codified, that schools have the right to choose a uniform policy and what the uniform policy is if they would like one. The reason we felt the need to have a resolution stating this is during COVID, we lifted this for a number of reasons that are outlined in the resolution that we'll see later. And there was certainly some confusion in the community, to Ms. Bolton's point, I think, about why does my school want a uniform? It's like, well, they had one, then they didn't have one. It's their right to have one again. So just to make it clear that schools do have that right, we created a resolution just to, again, create clarity in the community. So thanks for the question.
Other questions, Ms. Bolton? Any other questions from other board members? Hearing none, we'll keep moving to our third committee report, which is the Student Achievement Committee of the Whole. We're going to hear that from Vice President Craig.
Alrighty. So we met on June 14th, and we started out as usual going through our 4 priorities, our 3-month priorities. The superintendent then did a presentation with regards to the Public Safety Academy, the opportunities for expansion, improvement, and integration. It was a very good presentation and a lively discussion around it. The superintendent also did a presentation on the changes to the state accountability system. And so discussing about priority school identification, some of the ways to exit from it, as well as some of the challenges that are presented from those changes. We also then went into a presentation slash board interactive with regard to our mission, vision, and forecast, working with Monica Rosen with the ALMA Advisory Group. And so the board worked through from the template of the draft version of a mission and vision statement to offer our suggestions and thoughts that then resulted in the creation also of a survey that went out to the community to share their thoughts on our press mission and vision statements, as well as kind of working through as well as Monica Rosen working through our edits and thoughts with regard to the draft of the mission and vision statements. We also concluded with discussing the fiscal year 2024 budget and some of the revisions to their. Treasurer Wagner and the superintendent provided some discussion around it, as well as things like the use of ESSER funds and the funds within the central office budget. And that is all that I believe we have covered. So I submit these minutes as written.
Any questions for Vice President Craig? Noting that we were all in this meeting that we're presenting the report of. Okay, excellent. Is there a motion to approve all three committee reports, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. We've had our discussion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Committee reports are approved. So moving right along to this is the meatiest section of our meeting this evening. We have three presentations and discussions this evening, all of which are very, very important. We're going to start with inviting our guests for this evening, the Monica Rosen from the ALMA Advisory Group, for the next installment of our vision, mission, and forecast work as part of our strategic planning efforts. That will be followed by an update on our FY24 budget, followed by a discussion about the hard work the policy committee has been doing to update our bylaws. And if we have Monica, or do we have you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Thank you for being with us tonight, and we will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you all. And just checking, President Lindy, we have 45 minutes.
We do, and we have. I did not think. Ms. Jones has been recovering from COVID, and we do have her remotely tonight, which is great. And I thank her for being here. But we have all of us.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you, Rob, for putting the presentation up on the screen. We can move right to the second slide. For our next 45 minutes, we've got three things to cover. I'm going to provide a quick status update with some early results on our community survey. We are going to take a look at the vision and mission. I have incorporated all of your feedback from our last conversation and the materials that were the notes that you each provided. So I'll be sharing sort of a version 2.0 of each statement for some conversation. And in terms of the forecast, we're just going to discuss what appear to be the core elements of the forecast so that we can engage in a conversation and make sure we're capturing the things that are most important as we're thinking about the forecast. If we can move to the next slide. A quick reminder on a couple of things. The first is that our shared purpose in this work is to revise the mission and vision for the district based on the input from the Cincinnati Public Schools community. We also want to develop a shared forecast for the district's vision that illustrates what the district will look like locally, regionally, and nationally when we are successful. If we move to the next slide. We've got our shared agreements for our conversations. I always like to start with just a reminder of the shared agreements that we're using when we're engaging in this work. The one thing that I added at the last conversation and want to call out today is that these discussions are very future focused in nature, so wanting to stay in the future we're envisioning for the district and what is possible there, and try to resist the urge to fix sort of short-term issues or concerns that we might have, but to have that bigger, longer-term view. I'm going to move to the next slide. I'm going to share real quickly where we are in our timeline and what our activities have been. So in terms of our process, we expanded the outreach and the data that we're gathering to inform the vision and mission. So where we are right now is we've completed all of our virtual community conversations and in-person community conversations. We launched a survey on June 21st that I'll be sharing a little bit more about. We've extended the deadline of that survey beyond what we discussed last time to maximize participation. So we're expecting to have all data available July 10th in order to be able to finalize your vision and mission statement. Any questions about the timeline before I share a little bit more about what the engagement has been to date and results of the survey so far?
Board members have any questions? No questions here, Monica.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So, just to kind of give you a sense of what the outreach has been, over 300 CPS community members who've participated in various processes identified by the board were received specific outreach to join us. In addition to that, the superintendent and her staff extended invitations to all members of the community. We had 4 sessions in person in May, where we had 25 participants, and then at the board's request, we hosted 5 additional virtual sessions. That's where the full community was invited. We ended up with 65 registered participants. We now have our community survey. I'm going to talk more about that on our next slide. And we've now engaged in one-on-one interviews with, I think, everyone on the board. That's okay, Rob, you can move right on. That's perfect. Thank you. So we are very pleased to share. The survey has been out for 5 days. We've had 1,042 respondents to the survey, which is fantastic early response. We have in that group, about half of the participants are identifying as families, and about 42% are district staff and employees. Just as a point of reference, this is indicating to us about 6.6% of all of your staff have now participated. At our last conversation, we had discussed at least trying to get 5% of our of each of our stakeholder groups in. So we've now surpassed that with your staff. This is a really positive indication that this work is really valued by your community. It's something that they want to be a part of. So I expect this number to continue to grow. In terms of the breakdown of race and ethnicity, we're seeing representation that's fairly similar to what we saw in the superintendent search participation. So in that process, we had 51% of participants were identifying as white. In this one right now, we're at 48% identifying as white. The next largest group represented here are Black participants who are at 31% of the total. So this is something we will continue to keep an eye on, both in terms of numbers of participants and representation in terms of race, ethnicity. Really want to give a huge thanks to the superintendent and her staff who posted about the surveys on social media, have put out information across all of their communication channels. That's absolutely helped us to get such a strong initial response. The survey will be open until July 10th, so we still have several weeks, and we'll continue to make a push to expand participation in the survey. Any questions or comments about this?
Any questions or comments from board members? No questions or comments here.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, so before we move to the next slide, we're now going to discuss the vision statement and mission statement. And what I did in the last, at the end of the last meeting, what the ALMA team did was we took all of the notes from our shared conversation and all of the written feedback that we received from individual members of the board. And so we now have what I'm kind of calling a 2.0 version. You know, I expect us to continue to make changes. And once we receive all of the survey feedback, we'll want to revisit this. But board members, Bolton and Lindy, didn't want to miss the opportunity for the group to continue building on this work. So I want to share with you where we are after incorporating all of the discussion and notes from last week. We're going to move first to the vision statement, which is the next slide. So what I would like to do is to read the statement out to you all, and then would like to open up the group for discussion on any changes you still would like to make here, things that you would like to make sure that we add here. And as we did last time, Rob, we'll ask you to put this in a view mode where people can see the notes that I'm capturing as we're discussing. Yes, that's perfect. Okay, so, and if you can zoom in, is that easily visible to everybody in the room?
Rob, if you could zoom in just a little bit, it's a little hard to see where we are. It looks like we are having some trouble zooming in. Monica, how hard would it be to share this document with people's email addresses? A number of folks have laptops up here.
Not hard at all. We will get it shared with everyone. And why don't we just go ahead, Rob, and put it right back into slideshow mode so that there's no issue viewing the content on the slide.
Thanks, Monica, and thank you, Rob.
Great. And letting my team know to send you all access to this document. Okay, so the vision statement as it is after our last meeting is the following. Cincinnati Public Schools will be the best public school district in the country because of the engaged community of families, workforce, and partnerships working together to ensure that every student is safe, seen, empowered, and prepared to pursue their life's passions. That's where we ended at the last meeting, and that's incorporating all of the conversation and notes that was had. The only piece that was a little unresolved at the end of the last conversation was whether we would say best public school district in the country or system of excellent schools, or both of those things. So with some of the feedback against best public school district in the country is that it's not specific enough and different people could define it different ways. And also, is the bar high enough if we're saying best public school district in the country? So with that, we'll give the group an opportunity. I know this is you're all seeing this again. We spent a lot of time on it in the last session, but wondering if you have any current responses, feedback, reactions to what you're seeing here as a potential new vision for the district.
Thank you, Monica. Are there board members who would like to go first? Ms. Bolton.
Yeah, I think I'll say what I said before. The word best is of concern to me. Well, I don't even know what that means, what best is. And so I have worry about that. And I think I said the other time too, that I have concern making our goal to be necessarily comparative to others rather than us comparing ourselves to some sort of higher standard or goal to reach or what have you. So I'm concerned about the best public school district in the country, because I'm not sure what best means. Is that best in teaching reading, best in whole child, best in providing choices, best financially? So I think that is of concern. I think having a lofty goal and a driving force to it, I think makes sense. But best is just doesn't cut it with me.
Thank you, Eve. Are there other pieces of feedback or reactions that board members would like to share? I'm not seeing very many. Superintendent, were you, go ahead, please.
So I know there's been a lot of discussion around the system of schools because we think about ourselves in a system of excellent schools. So having the conversation that we had around BEST, maybe if there was support for Cincinnati Public Schools will be a system of excellent schools, because that could be an option, just to include the system of schools that we have versus the individual school district.
Thank you, Superintendent. I know Mike was trying to get a word in here, and then we'll come back to Ms. Bolton. Good.
Thank you, President Lindy, and sorry I was not here when we got to this, but it looks like it reflects at least the one session I was at that Monday night. And I can kind of, on my own, since I know all of you pretty well, sort of intuit how we got here, and I can see some of you in here. So my initial, this won't surprise anybody, probably, I think it's too long and wordy. I don't fully understand. I'm not fond of the list of families, workforce, and partnerships. I don't know what workforce means, first of all. I know what workforce means. I don't know what that means. But I think it's a slippery slope, because there's like 700 other things we could put there. So I'd say get rid of all that. And lastly, so that's the long, I'd get rid of the list. I'm not fond of the list. And I would not have thought what Ms. Bolton said, but I see what she's saying about the comparison piece. I don't know if I agree necessarily or not. I need to think about it, but I see what you're saying. It makes sense to me. But I think I said this on that Monday night. I feel like a vision statement should be snappy and ridiculous. And this is neither.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Morosky, Ms. Bolton, or Mrs. Weinberg, did you?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll bring in folks who haven't gone yet.
So I'm going to have to agree with my colleagues as well. I'm the type of person, looking at the screen and seeing it separated, I had to actually just write it all out again and kind of read it to myself. I'm not a fan of best either. I don't know if there's another word that we can utilize to describe the school district. And I do think it's too wordy. And I would agree with you, Board Member Morosky. It needs to be catchy. It needs to be something that's very quick and snappy that even our students can relate to it as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Either from Dr. Moffitt or Mr. Craig, anything that people want to share before we go back to Ms. Bolton? We'll go back to Ms. Bolton.
President Lindy.
Oh, Ms. Jones, yes.
I'm here.
Voice from on high. Please.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Actually, there's a couple things about this I like if it was shortened. So I just have a suggested sort of statement for it, which could shorten it, but give it some of the focus, which I like. So I had, the vision is I don't know the first word, but system of excellent schools where every student is safe, empowered, and prepared for life. Period. That's it. That's just my suggestion.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Ms. Bolden.
Yeah, I appreciate the superintendent resurfacing the whole idea of a system of schools. I think that was part of it. I don't know if that was part of our mission, but I know that that was talked about. I do like the working together, let's see, the students safe, seen, empowered, and prepared. I do like that. I don't know if I like the order of that, but I like that. And I, again, say I did like the passion piece, thought that was good. So I think shorter and a system of schools, of excellent schools. The only thing I feel worried about is some of the things that truly are kind of that whole child equitable access and sustainability or whatever, but that can come in the mission, it would seem to me. But I do like the safe, seen, empowered, and prepared. Not for life, though. I still hate that. Everybody has that one.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. I'll share just a quick reflection, and then if other folks want to share, either who haven't or would like to go again. So I may be the lone defender of the best public school district in the country. And I think the argument I would make for something like that, if we don't have that, is what's the difference between this being fluff and something that we can actually use to hold ourselves accountable for? Maybe it's not best because best is itself fluff, and people could use best to mean all kinds of things. But I think there is power in setting a clear and inspiring rallying cry for an organization that will cause it to work hard and do something that's never been done before. And wherever we land, I think if we're going to invest time and energy in this, it should be something that inspires. And I think that we can do that with different language, but I hope that we can find something like that by our final version. Any other comments? Mr. Craig?
So I'll share the one thing, and this is where I always struggle with when we do vision, when people do vision statements, is that vision statements are supposed to be some kind of broad scope version of a like power message, right? Like something that we're all supposed to feel empowered and treat as grand and wonderful. And I never really actually see a vision statement that ever makes you feel like you want to go out and like run through a brick wall. So I think in some ways, making a nice, concise statement to Mike or to Board Member Roski's point may help this have a little bit more of that punch to it. But I do want to. I actually did like the idea of these system of excellent schools, or systems of schools striving for excellence, or something to that effect. Because I do worry a little bit about when we say excellent schools, if we does that leave room for someone to say that a school that doesn't achieve at the level they want it to be at is not a part of that system? And so I almost wonder sometimes saying something like striving towards excellence or dedicated to excellence or something, I don't know, something that vein of thought might still give the same idea or the same message, but not hold us to say that only the great schools, the high performing schools are a part of the system. Right, that every school is striving to get to that level. Every school is dedicated to getting to that level. But if they're not there yet, are they still part of the system of schools? Right, and so I think that's the only thing I would have a little worry in. I thought Board Member Jones's edit to kind of shrink it down to the system of school statement and then the working together to ensure every student gives it a little bit more of that conciseness that was kind of being discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Superintendent.
So I just think about the term excellent or best. If we use a word like that, it's going to imply that we are holding it against something, right? So if we say best, if we say excellent, we still have to go back at some point and define what that means. So I think it's just a matter of where the board lands on which kind of descriptive terminology we want to use there. Also, to Board Member Roski's earlier question, some of the other information in there was born out of some of the feedback sessions that Alma did with other groups and stakeholder groups. And so that's kind of where that came from, just as some background to it. But I think there was concern that it would get a bit wordy across the board. So trying to get to concise, but that's where it started.
Thank you, Superintendent. Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Lindy. So I am not totally unsold on Best. I said I didn't know. I said I saw Ms. Bolton's point. So I don't know if you're the lone defender yet. I'm not opposed necessarily to a word that says we are better than others. I don't know if Best is right, but something that's kind of, as we've been looking at it, and Ms. Jones sort of triggered this in me. I think the part of this that I like the best, and I don't know if I like the wording, but the part I like the best is that it does call out the individual student, and that every student feels this way. And having a mission statement that speaks to a school district or a system of schools, I don't particularly care what you guys can figure that out. Whatever that is, whatever we want to call ourselves, that we are the premier, the pinnacle. If we don't like Best, also don't particularly care. But that we recognize the individuality of our students consistently, and more so that our students know that. And so I think that's to me, that's the most powerful thing up here. And however that can, and I think that can be worded much, shorter, but that is powerful to me.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes, so I have a new version. I'm just going to read it, and you all can tell me what you think. So I have here, Cincinnati Public Schools will be an innovative district of schools that unite families and communities that will connect workforce and partnerships. We will empower students to be seen, safe, prepared, and pursue life's passion. And that's it. Of course, some of the wording can be changed, but that's my thought process.
Mrs. Weinberg, could you just read that one more time for me, please?
Yes, Cincinnati Public Schools will be an innovative district of schools that unite families and communities that will connect workforce and partnerships. We will empower students to be seen, safe, prepared, and pursue their life's passion.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any last comments or questions on this slide before we keep moving?
Mr. Lindy?
Ms. Jones?
Yes, my only, I think there's, I hear a lot that I like coming from just multiple people. And Mary's statement, I think one of the things that I'm sorry, Ms. Weinberg, it should be a little more formal. One of the things I liked is that one of the things I felt about her statement was it really does kind of capture your attention. So I always think about a vision statement as your roadmap of what you want to see, and something that captures your attention. And I think it can be lofty. It doesn't have to be specific. Your mission has, in my opinion, has to be a little more specific, because that's what your mission is, what is driving your strategies. So I don't know. I kind of like Ms. Weinberg's statement, although I do wish that it was shortened a little bit. But that's just my opinion.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Go ahead, Monica.
I've got both of the drafts that have been read out to the best of my ability. Mrs. Weinberg, I probably missed a word or two there, but Rob, if you can exit the slideshow and re-enter the slide 8, we should be able to see the two versions that have been offered up. That's it. If you can put that back in slideshow. So here we have the first one. And that's just incorporating discussion. Cincinnati Public Schools will be a system of excellent schools where every student is seen, safe, empowered, and prepared to pursue their life's passions. And then the second one is Cincinnati Public Schools will be an innovative system of schools that unite families and communities, that will connect workforce and partnerships. We will empower students to be safe, seen, empowered, and prepared to pursue their life's passions. And Mrs. Weinberg, I'm sure I missed something there, so if you can let me know.
Yes, so just the second empowered. I think it should just say we will empower students to be safe, seen, and prepared to pursue their life's passion.
Perfect. Passion singular or plural? So any reactions, responses, we can leave this here and move on to the vision statement. But now that you're seeing them both up on the slide, wondering if there are any final thoughts.
Yeah, Ms. Bolden?
I like both of them better than the ones we started with tonight. I like the first one better than the second one because I think part of that second one starts to sound like the mission rather than the vision or the how to do this, if I'm understanding that correctly. But I like the shortness of it, of the first one, and the other one I think starts to lead us to the mission.
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. Are there other comments?
Mr. Lindy?
Ms. Jones?
Yes. My comment is looking at both of these statements. Now, I also like the first one better, mainly because it's shortened to the point. And I agree with Ms. Bolton that the second one is more, in my opinion, more directed toward mission. And yeah, so the first one would be my choice.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. I know the superintendent had a reaction too. Is there anybody who wants to jump in? Okay, superintendent.
Just thinking about it also, and I think we knew that this would happen, but either of them are also completely aligned with everything that's in the strategic, the administrative portion of the strategic plan. So there is complete alignment for either of these areas. Either of these statements, of course, the more concise one I think would allow better use and for it to become a part of our working work.
Thank you, superintendent. Other comments or reactions? Mr. Craig.
Just and triggered a thought of me from what Board Member Morosky had mentioned. And I don't know if it's better to just say that the students are, like every student is or every student feels. Because I do think some ways and we may be saying two different things. When we say every student is, it's just like a state of being that it is what happens. That doesn't always mean everyone feels that way though, right? Like in some ways, that was more of my question. I don't actually have a preference on either way, but just kind of wondering what other folks' thoughts were.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Any responses to his question? I can share a quick one. I happen to like the way it's written here a great deal, and it's the combination of the future tense and then the word is, because I think we have examples where kids may feel as though they are academically ready for blank, blank, or blank, but we haven't done our job yet to make sure that's true. And so I think to think about this as what will be true, not what is true now. And what will be true is not that students feel a certain way, but that they are a certain way. So from my perspective, I really like the way the first one's written, but I'm just one person. Any other? Mr. Morosky, were you reaching for your mic?
I was just going to say, thank President Lindy. I really like the first one as well. And the only thing I would request, and I got in a fight with Dr. Little about this earlier. It was an intense fight, and I'm glad none of you saw it. It was embarrassing, but there needs to be a comma after empowered.
Oh, we're going to have a serial comma debate.
Well, this has been a 6-year mission of mine.
All right. Thank you.
But President Lindy?
Mrs. Weinberg, I think, was going to go next, and then we'll go to Ms. Bolden.
I will be quick. I will agree with everyone else. I like the first one and I like how to the point it is. So if we had to vote, I would go with the first one today.
Thank you. Ms. Bolden.
I just wanted to remark that it took almost 30 minutes for Mr. Morosky to figure out the punctuation, and I think that's a record length of time. I could see that you were holding yourself back. You were holding back.
We all bring different strengths to this board. One of us was a former English teacher, and I'm glad you're here. Any last comments or questions? Monica, we might be ready to keep moving. Thank you.
Fantastic. So just a couple quick thoughts. So I've added the comma in there as we've gone through. I appreciate everyone's discussion and thoughtfulness as always. I did want to come back to what the superintendent said earlier. Yes, it's true. The community said they wanted to see themselves explicitly named. What I think we should do is have an eye towards that in the mission statement. I would recommend one of these two should refer to the people that make all of this possible, because it was such a strong theme in our listening sessions. So with that, it looks like we have a strong statement to build on. When we receive the survey feedback, the ALMA team will be checking against what came out in the survey and what is showing up in the vision statement, and we may have some additional ideas to be considered as we receive that survey feedback. So we've just got a few more minutes left. I want to move us on to the next slide. We actually have two versions of the mission statement, and given the feedback a few of you had about the deconstructed version not being helpful to look at, we made some quick adjustments here. We have two mission statements, and I'll read them both to you. The first one is the one we spent the most time with in our last meeting, and it is, we provide high-quality instruction and opportunities for every student in every classroom, every day, in environments that are healthy, safe, nurturing, and engaging for students and staff, and working in partnership with each school's community. There was another mission statement that was listed in the alternatives that several board members said to me at the end of the last meeting they really liked. So I wanted to bring that one up for you, and if we can go to the next slide, I'll read you the second one, which is, Cincinnati Public Schools continuously strives to provide every student a learning environment that inspires curiosity and lifelong learning by providing access to caring and well-supported educators, well-resourced classrooms and resources, and the supports that ensure every student succeeds. I apologize, Mr. Morosky, for the lack of commas. This was a bulleted list before, so I have to correct that. But, and why don't I do this? I'll put them both on one slide, and we can kind of look at them together like we just did with the vision statement. And let's see, Rob, I think if you can exit and come on back in, slide 9 has the two drafts of the mission statements there. There we are. So there are two versions. The top paragraph is one version, the second paragraph is another version.
Monica, would you just say one more time the origin story for the two different paragraphs?
Yes, the first one is the one we really deconstructed in the last meeting and really wordsmithed all of us together. And it reflects the feedback in the discussion as well as the notes, the handwritten notes and feedback that we received. In addition to this first one, though, you might all remember there were two slides of alternative mission statements. And the second one here was in that list of alternatives. And I had several people tell me they really liked that one, even though we didn't discuss it. So, and multiple people added edits and comments, written comments to that second one. So I'm bringing them both here for the group to review and discuss.
Got it. Thank you very much. Board members have questions or reactions to the two mission statements that are on the slide? Ms. Bolden?
I think it's only in the second one, where it's described, maybe it's in the first two, the learning environment. I like learning environment instead of environment. That could be air conditioning. I mean, I like the idea of a learning environment where this occurs. And it's in the second one, not necessarily the first one. I like the first one maybe better than I like the second one, but not as strongly as the last vision differences.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Other board members or the administration? Mr. Craig?
So I do think maybe one thing that we, to Monica's point earlier, is that at least in the first one where it talks about we, might be an opportunity for us to identify who the we is. I know we talked the last time around not using a more broad term when we're doing a mission, but since if we're pulling it out of the vision statement, that is an opportunity to kind of clarify who the we is, the first one. But I mean, I actually like both statements. I don't know that I have one that is more, I do like the lifelong learning. That inspires curiosity and lifelong learning part. I just don't know how you fit that up in the first one.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Others? Superintendent?
Does it matter that we are repeating, now this is, I guess, the writer in me now. Does it matter that we're repeating the same words in the mission that we have in the vision? So we have, if the board chooses to go with the vision that we just had, it includes many of the same terms that we have in the vision. That's one. And the second is there was also discussion about possibly including some of the terminology from Board Member Weinberg's vision portion because it began to speak more to mission. And if we did like the one around the resources, just the personal concern of well-resourced classrooms and then and using resources again. So having a different terminology for that, if that's the one that we're going to look at for conciseness.
Thank you, Superintendent. Other reactions, comments, suggestions? Dr. Moffitt?
I kind of like them both. I like the first one and the second one for different reasons. I think that we do, the superintendent's point, we already talk about healthy or safe environments before, but I do like partnerships in the first one. And partnerships is not mentioned, nor health or safety in the second. So I kind of like the second better. And I would just add, so it says, Cincinnati Public Schools continuously strives to provide every student a learning environment that inspires curiosity and lifelong learning by providing access to caring and well-supported educators, well-resourced classrooms. And then I don't like the resources that supports. I like maybe in partnerships that support, or something about connectivity to the community or connectivity to those resources to ensure that every student succeeds. I just think the second would be great if we had something about partnerships in there.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy. And I was having a similar thought as Dr. Moffitt. And so if I may, I like elements of both of these. I don't like either one of them though. So I kind of took elements from both and I would just offer this up as a combo. And it does address the community partners, which was not addressed in the vision. And I appreciate the superintendent reiterating that for me, because I wasn't here when that the community was pretty out. And same with you, Monica, thank you. So what it says, and this is the easiest way for me to think out loud. CPS, Cincinnati Public Schools, whatever you want. CPS provides high quality instruction and opportunities in safe environments for every student by supporting educators in well-resourced classrooms, collaborating with community partners, and recognizing the individuality of every student. CPS provides high quality instruction and opportunities in safe environments for every student That's from the first one. That's, to me, that's what the entirety of the first one says. And then go to the second one, by supporting educators in well-resourced classrooms. That's actually the first one. Anyway, collaborating with community partners and recognizing the individuality of every student. I just threw in the last one because I like that, but it's not up there.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. I think that sounds very nice. Other board member comments or reactions?
President Lindy?
Ms. Jones?
Yes. Actually, I could probably go with any of these because I like both of them, either one. I think I'm leaning more toward Dr. Moffitt's choice for the second one, removing that second resources and adding community or partnerships to that. And the reason I like that one is I love the statement about providing every student a learning environment that inspires curiosity and lifelong learning. I think that's important. And the fact that we do it in the classrooms, we do it external to classrooms. I don't know if we want to say that, but external to classrooms, but that the community is involved with that. So I think the second one with a little more emphasis on the partnerships would work for me.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And other comments from board members? Okay. That may be it from us on this one, Monica.
Okay, fantastic. Rob, if you want to exit out and go on back in, you'll see Mr. Morosky's addition on there. And you can come back to the slideshow. It will be hard to read because there are a lot of words on the page. We'll continue to work with this. We've made notes of everybody's comments here. Really appreciate the things that are important to each of you. Do want to say that the learning environment and the learning experience was also something that was a real theme from the community. So appreciate that's being called out by members of the board. So we will continue to do that. I know we are out of time. If I may, President Lindy, just wanted to share one last piece about the elements of the forecast, but we don't have to discuss it now.
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay, if you can move, Rob, to slide 11 here. What we wanted to just share is, so the forecast, first of all, exactly to the superintendent's point earlier, it will help you codify and define how you, what you will measure against when you use words like excellent or best or any of those kinds of things. There are things that are not reflected in the mission or vision, but that are hugely important to the board and to the community and should be parts of the forecast. So there are 4 big ideas. I'm just going to share them with you, and then we'll talk about how best to get your feedback on these. You've all talked about the ability to attract and retain great talent. You've used phrase like being the employer of choice for educators and staff. People not only want to work here, but they choose to spend their careers here and stay here. So attracting and retaining is very important. The second piece, it has been this focus and was a big theme last time, this idea that your graduates are highly competitive and highly sought after by universities, by employers, by the military, and that they have access to direct pathways to fields that offer genuine economic mobility. This idea that people are able to build generational wealth because of the opportunities provided to them in their education at CPS. The third big idea was the areas that the district becomes nationally recognized for. As you know, we're talking locally, state, and nationally. And many of you mentioned innovation. You talked about cultural responsiveness. You talked about embracing your students' cultural identities in their learning experience. And this individualized piece that Mr. Morosky was speaking about, something your families and communities also really talked about a lot. This idea of that we're not just defining success through test results, that we are able to define success for each individual student, what that means for them. So I can imagine for the superintendent, that's a lot harder to measure, but wanted us to think about what that individual recognition of each student, what that looks like in terms of a forecast for the district. And then finally, families and communities are full partners and decision makers. You know, we were saying in the last slide, in the mission statement, this idea of partnerships. Just want to note in my conversations with the community, the term partnership and partners has a very specific understanding in the district that may or may not necessarily include families. So just how you think about the connection between site-based decision-making, how local communities inform what's happening in their schools, and how the district is proactively partnering with families as in the work, as well as with the rest of the community and with your community partners. Those are all ideas that I want to make sure we're reflecting in the forecast. So I know we're out of time, and we'll leave it to President Lindy if you want to open up for quick reactions. Otherwise, what I would love to do is follow up with outreach to board members, or to offer to us any additional aspects that they want to make sure are included, or to spend our next conversation, which we'll need one more, not only reviewing the survey results, but digging a little more deeply into the forecast.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, Monica. I think if people have something quick they want to share or ask about, I think they should absolutely share it. I think we can do that and also hit the rest of our items. And if they don't, that's okay too. I'll just share, I think these look really exciting. I'm excited for our next conversation. Thank you for all your work on this, Monica. Ms. Bolton, anything you want to share? Any other board members? Okay, thank you. And we'll look forward to catching you next time.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great evening.
You too.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, so we're moving right along, everybody. I shared that there were 3 big presentation discussions for this evening. That was the first of the 3. We're moving on to number 2, which is update on our FY24 budget.
Good evening, everyone. I'm waiting for Rob to pull up the. Flip to the next slide. Thank you. So just four things I wanted to cover tonight. One is to review the board assignment I received on June 14th to look at a historical perspective of the central office budgets, their centralized budgets for general fund pre-COVID to the current year. Then give you an update on the state budget. Talk a little bit about the annual appropriations, and I lost the whole board.
You're fine, keep going.
Okay. And then talk a little bit about long-term view and recommendation. So go ahead, Rob. So, so I was asked to produce and group into like categories the central office budgets pre-COVID. So started with fiscal year 19. Because COVID hit during the 20 school year, and then 21, 22, and 23. These are the original budget values that were adopted by the board. And this is the curricular crew. It looks a little crazy because there's the last 3 superintendents, there's been reorganization. So I had to try to figure out how to include, which ones to include and what not to. But for the sake of argument, pre-COVID, we were at 22.6 million in the general fund for all the curricular budget units. And then in the current year, we're at 37.6 in the general fund. There's also ESSER on top of that, and I'll show you that here shortly. Wanted to point out here under preschool promise, you notice $9.8 million in 19, and we're up to 13 million in 23. We've outgrown the $15 million set aside. That 12 million or that 13 million is not inclusive of the amount of tuition assistance that we capture in our teacher salaries. That's another $6.5 million on top of that. So the total nut for the preschool expansion is $20 million, where we have a $15 million revenue source. Okay. Next slide. So here I've grouped the Department of Student Services, another pretty large growth over the last 5 years, from 56 million up to 100 million. What you'll see under Student Services 076 budget, you see this huge increase in 21 of up to 52 million, and then in 22, 53 million, that drops back down. That's partially the pass-through funding for the special needs students. Under Human Resources, the first line, union contract obligations, has a significant kind of growth in it. And what we're trying to do is capture everything that's required by collective bargaining agreement that's not like a staff member. So that would include required professional development set-asides, the lead teacher stipends, team leader stipends, termination benefits, which is really sick leave conversion for everybody that retires, amongst long-term substitute teachers that are covering for long-term illnesses, not for vacancies. So that's an area that's grown over the last few years. And then talent. The Employee and Labor Relations and Leadership Pipeline Development are two new budget units, but they were part of either talent or HR, and they're trying to get a little bit more definitive on those functions. So they're being split out. So when we finish 24 and I update this with 24, you'll see dollar values in those columns, or in those rows. Just trying to catch my notes. So, okay. So under operations, the biggest driver here is transportation. So you started at 43 million up to 36, well, down to 36 million, but there's 9 million sitting in ESSER. So it looks like a drop, but it's not. I think that was, oh, and under purchasing, you'll see kind of $500,000 increase over the last 5 years. That was an effort to, when I first became the treasurer, the finance committee at the time, we're getting complaints from teachers having to use their own funds for classroom supplies, which my response was, I don't know, because they're leaving millions of dollars on the table at the end of every year. So it's more of an allocation issue than it is a budget issue. But I worked with the CFT office, not superintendent, sorry, President Sellers and some of her staff to come up with what's every classroom need as a base supply kit. And we came up with about $600,000 worth of supplies to allocate to every classroom to start the new year. So a new whiteboard, pens, and tissues, and those charts, those sticky charts, things like that. So that represents an increase in the purchasing department. Next slide. So under school and student support, you can see that grouping there. The largest point I wanted to make here is that first line under tuition, where you see it's 110 million and then it drops dramatically, and that's the elimination of pass-through funding over the years. Athletics has gone up. What else do I want to say? Oh, the resource coordinators would be coming into the school and community partners budget line item, but that will come back in 24 because they were in student wellness and then in ESSER, and then that funding is drying up. Information technology, the growth there represents the growth in digital education, right, in instruction. And then everything else is in other. And so fiscal year 19, all the centralized budgets represented 362 million. And fiscal year 23, 336 million, which looks like a nice decrease. But take into consideration that 362 million included $110 million of tuition. So it's really an $84 million increase in centralized budgets over the last 5 years. That will become significant in a later slide. Okay, so next slide. So what I did is I took a summary each one of those sections, and then I added the ESSER funds onto them so you can compare apples to apples, because the ESSER funds are going away next year. I did not include, to the best of my ability, because I had to dig deep, anything that related to summer scholars or building upgrades like the Dome or the Hyde Park, Pleasant Ridge, and anything that went directly into schools. And so then I added those to those general fund, and you can see how that impacted those departments. Then I slapped it up on the next slide in a graph form. So you can see, let me get my glasses on so I can identify colors for you. The big blue one with the big dip, that's the tuition assistance pass-through funding elimination. The pink line is curriculum. The green line is information technology. The dark purple line is the other group. Yellow is operations, and orange is Department of Student Services. So we've had some recent conversations about digging a little bit deeper into why the increase with Department of Student Services has happened over the last 5 years. Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss off? Oh, the gray one, I'm sorry, thank you. And that's human resources and talent. So you can see there's an upward trend on almost all of them. And that, I would pause right there and answer any questions about this, but this was the assignment I received from the board at the last meeting.
Any questions about the figures that the treasurer has shared so far? Mr. Craig?
I just, again, think it's just going to be an interesting point that we've talked about it in budget and finance, but I think it's also just kind of a general thought though also, which is that, again, progressively we're going to have costs don't go down generally. So the things that cost us today is going to cost us more 2 years from now, 5 years from now, that type of deal. I think it makes it interesting to see on there where some of those drivers are, because I think things like the pass-through that changes how we think about it, but maybe not necessarily how our revenues change in the same way, is helpful for us to see. The one that does lead me to a little bit of thought there is that Department of Student Services, such a substantial jump up there. Now, I think it also follows that COVID year, you would have a lot of resources dedicated in whether or not we've come back down from those services that are being offered, or whether or not those services are being offered in the same way or same manner. Might be part of that explanation, but I do think it's helpful to see.
We're going to dig deeper into that and we'll come back with more information. But
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Other questions from the material that's been presented so far? Ms. Bolton.
I think this is very, I think it's very helpful to see it this way. And I know I'm going to say this and make more work for you, but some of what you described to us, a little bit more of the narrative written down would also help us as we go through these next many weeks, hopefully not too many weeks, looking at the budget, just a budget narrative on the high points that you think we need to have explained, so it's not relying upon us taking our own notes and trying to extrapolate it as well. It would seem to me that this also gives us some sort of insight as we look at the coming budget, whether it's FY24 or FY25 or FY26. It would seem to me that this way of looking at it, this formatting, helps us understand where we may be thinking in terms of it's looking like we're going to need some other money.
yes, that's in a later slide.
And I appreciate that you're going to be addressing that because we don't usually talk about that, and the graph helps us as well. I think too on the preschool piece, I know there's an agreement out there that is, I don't know, waiting to be finished or negotiated, and there's some instance of whether or not we're going to do that. But my recollection from Finance Committee, and I don't know if this is your recollection, Treasurer, or other board members, the request from Preschool Promise reflected as though we had a new agreement. I don't know if who can respond to that, but we don't have a new agreement. And we would be functioning under the current agreement if at least that's my non-legal understanding, that until you get a new one. And there's money there. And the reality is, it's now one of our hallmarks of our district is early childhood. It always has been. We've always led the state in kindergarten and whether full day or half day, and we lead the state in preschool. So I think it's a totally important priority, but we have to find these millions when we make some decisions, and I'm glad we're delaying those decisions somewhat with your temporary appropriations piece. But what about the preschool
So if memory serves me correctly, there were 3 items in the Preschool Promise budget that were new outside the original agreement. The first one was they wanted to increase the per pupil tuition assistance rate by 10% instead of the 3% that's allowable in the master agreement. The second thing, they wanted to extend the school year and offer year-round services, which our agreement specifically says school year. And the third one, I can't remember the exact details, but it had something to do with changing the formula, including lower stars, or changing the income level to be more inclusive. And so there were, I don't remember exactly what the impact of that was. I'll have to look it up, but it was maybe $2 million increase in the budget.
Thank you. And again, looking at these particular buckets and thinking in terms, I know I look at instructional stuff pre-COVID versus post-COVID and the COVID year's impact. This for me, this helps. I appreciate the chart.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Treasurer, were you gonna?
I was just going to ask them to keep going. I'm sorry. Was there other questions?
No, I had one follow-up question. Does anybody else have a question they want to ask first? Just clarifying on the Preschool Promise budget, Treasurer Wagner, my memory from the last presentation was their budget request was actually a lower number this year than it was last year. Is that not right?
It's within just a tad lower, a couple $100,000 lower. But those 3 items, it would be even lower had they not included those 3 items.
Right. So they are asking us for less than they asked for last year, and it's still under the total amount total.
No, together it's $20 million, and our annual revenue is 15. So we're
The thing I was trying to track was last time there was a column for each fiscal year, and there was a row for Preschool Promise, and the number for this year was lower than the one in the column from last year. Did I remember that wrong?
So go back a couple slides. I'll tell you, keep going. One more. So, yeah, so the $8 million that was from last year was net of their carryover. They're not anticipating, I think they're anticipating a $2 million carryover encumbrance. But this also does not include our portion of the tuition assistance because that's recognized in salaries. So it's about $6.5 million this past year. So collectively, we're outgrowing that budget. But they had a low year in 22 because they also lost students during COVID, and it took them a while to recover those students. I don't know that they're completely back to that original enrollment amount or not. I don't know.
Thank you. Mr. Craig?
And I think if I remember correctly from our discussions that we've had in Budget and Finance, I think part of it is they're anticipating an expansion over the next few years to be back at the levels that they were. And then they're also asking for the opportunity to allow certain students to be covered under tuition assistance that are not currently covered. So while this year's is getting back to more in their model, the struggles that we were seeing is that both this year is not sustainable and future years become even more unsustainable based on what their formula was. And so I think that's one of the things that we've had discussions about in budget finance as to whether or not we need additional revenue to cover both what we have that's expanding in the number of students that are coming to yes programs, as well as the students that they're seeking to have as part of the agreements covered. And so I think Treasurer Wagner, if I'm not mistaken, I think we were looking at the funds that we have to dedicate towards it after this year basically are not there.
They'll run out in 25, fiscal year 25.
Fiscal year 25. So then we would have to, at some point, either expand money that's coming in as far as revenue or change how we decide to fund both us and Preschool Promise.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. And I fully will go to Dr. Moffitt next. I fully believe that you all are closer to this than I am, as I'm not a member of the Finance Committee. I think that the piece I was responding to from our last meeting had a budget from FY23 for Preschool Promise of 12.9 and a draft FY24 budget of 12.9. And that's why I was trying to draw the line between what we saw last time and what we're talking about this time. Dr. Moffitt.
I think their increase also included that they're at full staffing.
Correct.
So they had some significant increase in their budget because now they are at a full complement of staff. In addition to, I want to say, wasn't there also a piece that they were providing compensation for additional stars or something like that? There were two reasons I think that part of their money, their increase in their funding was significant. And I know one of them was staffing. They were at a full complement of staff. And then I thought the other piece was inclusive of a bonus or some sort. And again, I may be missing that up, but something to compensate the lower starred or motivate the lower starred centers to get them where they needed to be was also was part of their budget too, right?
Well, they have a budget line item that they call, it's like coaching for the lower starred people, because they don't get the higher tuition assistance rate. And there was, I don't remember if there's growth in that or not. I'm sorry. I don't want to speak out of turn. I don't remember the details. I'll have to look it up.
I just remember when we're talking about the budget, part of their increased number included that they were at a full staff now, where they had not been before with their lower numbers. And then there was another reason, but I knew the staff piece was significant.
Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, and there's bigger issues in this budget and data than that, but I think we just wanted to respond that the budget that we have back from Preschool Promise has to reflect the agreement. But could I ask just a question in case as the public might read it? And I think you dealt with it, but I didn't write it down. When you're into the school and student support category, 5 and 8, all the way to 64.
2 slides, I think. One more. There you go.
Yeah, the difference would it's 93 million less or whatever. Could you just refer to that again and explain that so that the public doesn't think we're spending less money on schools and kids?
Sure. So in the previous state funding formula, they would fund all the resident students, and then deduct off of us tuition expenses if they attended a community school, a participating Ed Choice voucher school student, and then some Peterson and autism scholarships. So together it was 110 million, but then there was other money that was in the special ed department. I don't remember how much that was, but that state funding formula was changed in fiscal year 21. So you can see a dramatic drop in 22. So 22 and 23 was the last biennium budget from the state. So they eliminated pass-through funding, and they're funding those schools directly now instead of giving us the money and then deducting it off.
And that would help, what I was saying before about narratives. You're not looking for theses or something, or really essays, just some budget narrative pieces will help.
Okay.
I think as this document gets wider read. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So, next slide. Okay, so on the state budget, so they, just as I said, they're operating on a biennium budget. The current one ends in 4 days. And the last communication I had was, well, let me just stop. The House Bill 33, the impact of school funding is going to continue the 6-year phase-in on the fair funding formula. Remember, they adopted this formula, couldn't fund it completely, so they're phasing it in over a 6-year period. So they're continuing that. They are also updating the cost factors from 2018 to 22. And what that means is the average salaries across the state that they're using to multiply times the number of people that you in the formula. So they're at least giving us some inflationary increase. And so the simulation that was released shows that CPS would receive an additional $20 million in revenue. The Senate version, however, has a huge difference. They changed the wealth index calculation. They made the district much wealthier. And so they will only receive $6 million. So that would be a loss of $14 million that we were counting on to help pay for the wage reopener. So last week we received notice that the House rejected the Senate version. It's now in conference committee, and then letters are being sent to conference committee members asking for support. And hopefully we'll hear something in the next couple days. Okay, next slide. The appropriations resolution. So tonight I'm asking you to vote on 2 resolutions. One of them, and this is a requirement, but for Ohio Revised Code, so it allows every school district in the state of Ohio to spend money. You approve it at the fund level, so you're saying you can only spend up to this amount by fund number. It has to be approved before the fiscal year, or I can't start making payroll or vendor payments. And I have to submit it to the Hamilton County Budget Commission. We have 2 options to do a full year appropriation or temporary. We're going to go with the temporary because we don't have a state budget yet and we're not done working on our budget. The difference between this and the last couple years that we've done the 90-day temporary appropriation is the former years, I took the budget and calculated 90 days worth of budget, and that's what I asked you to approve. And so everybody had to create their contracts, their vendor contracts for only 90 days. And that became a nightmare because people would forget to amend their contracts after 90 days, and then we ended up with a bunch of then and nows. So this year, I'm asking for $300 million, which is about half the budget, to get us going so that we can do the contracts that need to be full year contracts, can start off with full year contracts, and we're not amending them 10, 11 times during the year. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense to me. The board members have questions. Seems like a nice process improvement, so thank you.
You're welcome. So the 2 resolutions are, you're doing a final one for this year, and that's a challenge because the year's not completely over yet, but I have to file it. I have to get your approval to do it on the last budget board meeting of the year, and have to file it before the next Hamilton County Budget Commission meeting, which is typically on the last day of the year. So it is our best guess at what we're going to finish the year at. So you'll do that, and then we'll ask the other one is the temporary 90 days. It has to be adopted by September 30, but we have a plan. So next slide. So we're currently under round 3 of budget reviews. They started today and will continue until July 7th. We're hoping on July 17th to come back with a draft balanced budget showing new investments and then activities that we are reducing or abandoning funding wise. And then asking for board feedback and questions. And then we'll bring back any other questions that are coming out of tonight. And then hoping for a final adoption by August 7th through the 28th, depending on how the 17th goes, but that we must do it by the 30th. So next slide, long-term financial view. So we've been talking a while, and I just decided to put this all into one summary, a couple summary slides here. We've outgrown our $15 million preschool expansion, and we're going to run out of that unspent money that we've been building over the last couple of years by 25, if not sooner. I did some analysis on the billion-dollar facility master plan. It is now 18 years old. It's shocking how fast that time went. The last school that we put into place was Aiken High School that opened in 2013.
Swoop. Oh, I'm sorry.
The first few schools we opened into, I thought it was Riverview, but there wasn't. There was 5 schools that were opened in 2005. And so at the time, the Ohio Schools Facilities Commission made us put a set aside of a $500,000 worth of value, which is $3.2 million, into a building maintenance fund, which does replace filters and it does some mechanical upgrades and stuff like that. But what we're facing now is beyond that regular routine maintenance and preventative maintenance, that we actually have 20-year-old roofs now, and the boilers and the chillers. So we're using ESSER this year to help fund next year's cost. But if I remember correctly, the 5-year roof replacement plan was about $6 million a year. And we can't absorb that in our operational budget. Okay. So in addition to that, we have the ad hoc committee that was referred to earlier that's looking at a building use plan. We had a conversation at the last meeting of schools of choice where I looked up just the increase in transportation since 2008. It was a $22 million increase in 16 years. And that's mostly driven, a lot of it's driven just by inflation, but mostly driven because of our choice package. Yeah. We're transporting everyone. And the unintended consequence of that choice is that as long as we offer citywide transportation to our students, we also have to offer citywide to the community schools and non-publics. And so that drives that cost higher. We have ESSER, as you remember my little cliff slide. Next year, there's $46 million worth of repeatable expenses that we'll have to find something to do with. The state funding formula, for every percent of state share that we lose, we become wealthier. We're losing $2.5 million in revenues. So over the last few years, we were at 46%. Prior to the state funding formula change, we were at 46%. So for every dollar our formula generated on a student, we only got 46 cents. As of the state funding formula, the new fair funding adoption, it dropped to 43%. Now we're at 40%, and the Senate bill is going to drive us under 40%. And nothing's changed for us economically, right? It's all relative to what else is happening in the rest of the state. But that's the Senate bill, the wealth calculation is going to be very long-term, very hurtful to us. In addition to just the normal economy of inflation and that we're in a tight labor market, you heard Ms. Sellers say before, now with this wage reopener, we're going to be able to recruit more people. Well, in order for us to stay competitive, we have to increase wages, with hard to fill positions. The next slide. So this is a reminder. This is a slide that came right out of the 5-year forecast in May, and it shows you the dark bar represents our revenue, estimated revenues. The gray bar is estimated expenses, and the yellow line represents our cash balance. And so as you can see, as our expenses are higher than our revenues, our cash balance decreases, and we're anticipating that drop into a deficit, cash deficit in 2026. That blue star represents the year the cliff hits and the year you're going on the ballot to renew the 48 million. So, next slide. So if you recall, Jens's, I call this the spaghetti slide. It shows you the levy cycles. And so the green one is the 65, was the first one we converted to a 10-year cycle. That comes up for renewal in 28. The blue line represents the $48 million one that's coming up in 25. If you choose to go 5 years, you'll come back in 30. If you go beyond that, you'll go to 35. And then the one on the below was the $52 million one that was just recently passed as a 10-year renewal. That will come back up in 32. So you have 25, 28, and 32. So as of now, you don't have a whole lot of opportunity to do new money. Next slide. So this just shows you that we have 3 fixed sum levies. And your options moving forward can be to take that $48 million levy, increase the value and the length of time. You can do a permanent improvement levy or a combination thereof, but permanent improvement cannot be used for normal operations. It can only be used for capital expenditures that have a life experience of 5 years or more. So you can use curriculum, like textbooks, options, technology, facilities. You can do a new operating levy, and so about $1 mil will generate about $6 million of operation revenue. Do a bond levy, like we did for the facility master plan, but you can't use that for normal operations either. You can only do that for facilities. And then, or you can issue another certificate of participation, which is acts like a capital lease. You just have to make sure you have room in your operating budget to make the lease payment. And we've done that a couple times with other, projects. So now's the time to start having those conversations as you're looking at the current year and the next year budget and the impact that's going to have to cash. I think that was my last slide. Right? Yes. Questions?
Thank you, Jen. Questions from board members? Dr. Moffitt.
Can you go back to slide 13 for me, Jen, or Rob and Jen? Can you talk about what is going on in 27?
So 27 would have been, so this was brought prior to the last levy.
Okay.
If the board had decided to stay at a 5-year cycle, we would have come back in 27 for another renewal, but we chose to go with a 10-year, so that no longer applies.
Okay.
Sorry,
So it is the 25, 28, and 32.
25, 28, and 32, yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions, Dr. Moffitt? Any other questions, reactions from board members? Ms. Bolton.
I appreciate the effort. I appreciate too the board as we are working, we better understand what the administration's working through because this is the environment in which we have to make a budget decision about 24. And it's also the environment in which the board has to be talking about whatever comes out of ad hoc as well and other issues as well. So appreciate the learning environment.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. I'll share. Other folks have comments or questions. Mr. Craig.
I just want to also, kind of reiterate something that was mentioned, but I think it's not mentioned enough. And since Board Member Morosky hasn't said it yet, I think this is again an example of how our state chooses how to invest in our students or lack thereof. And so the reality is, if we're getting less than 40 cents on the dollar, or 40 cents on the dollar for our students, there is no way we could ever be expected to pull 60 cents to the dollar from the community in which we live in. Like, it's just not realistic to say that we would be able to then fully fund the level of education that our students need, deserve, and have earned. And so in some ways, this puts us at the 8 ball every year, while we are also recognizing that there are things that make things that they actually do value, such as property, go up. That doesn't change the wealth of any of our students in our district. It doesn't change the wealth of any of the parents in our district. And so it is a struggle to deal with a state that does not actually look at the students when they look at whether or not you're a wealthy district or not.
Not to mention, if you look at a property tax bill in the city of Cincinnati, there's 13 taxing entities that you're competing, 12 other ones that you're competing with for those hard-earned dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. If no other comments from board members, I'll go real quick. I just wanted to say one piece of gratitude and then one question. The gratitude, just the number of things that I think the superintendent and treasurer have to juggle to get this right is really spectacular. And I think it's already increasingly complicated. And then add to it the fact that we don't even know what the state number is because they haven't finished their conference committee. It's just wild to try to lead an organization of this size with that many unknowns this close to a really important deadline. And so I wanted to offer some to the extent I can, sympathy or empathy, I'm not sure which one, on how hard this is, and also some gratitude around the contingencies you've put in place. I love the changes around the short-term contracts from past years, and so I just want to express some gratitude. On the question, I think our job as a board is hopefully to do two things with our budget. One is to make sure it's fiscally responsible, and it feels like there's an overwhelming amount of evidence from the presentation and the conversation that people are very focused on long-term financial responsibility. I think the second lens, though, is to what extent are we leveraging those dollars to reach the goals that we've set as a district as it relates to our goals and guardrails. So if we were to look for a second at what are some of the investments the district is making in this 90-day appropriation, what will some of those investments be in the full year budget? Could you share just a couple that are maybe most important for helping us reach whether it's the third grade reading outcome or the Algebra 1 outcome or the graduation rate outcome or the sixth grade reading outcome or the post-secondary outcomes? What are some of the most important investments we're making this year?
I think a few of them would definitely be around the curricular investments that we're making, the additional work around the alignment between our assessments, not just the assessment platform, but the ability for the platform to also assist us with tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, which has not been the case across the board. So doing an increase in that area as well. Also looking at, as we think about where we are with strategic plan and looking specifically at the work that we're doing around restorative practices, so professional development, around restoration, which is really a huge area as we think about the disparities in discipline that we see across our populations. So restorative practices, as well as we look at how we're looking to equip our educators, the professional development, really, really strong and profound professional development around understanding the instructional shifts, what those instructional shifts look like, the differences in seeing them in classrooms, and the work that we're doing with that around leaders. And so those 4 or 5 things collectively are showing up in our budget, but they're really paramount to the overall success of our school district.
Thank you very much. Any last comments or questions on budget? Dr. Moffitt.
So I just want to clarify, because you mentioned, Jen, on slide 11, that we talked in ad hoc about the building use plan. And I want to clarify that was the past ad hoc meeting, not the June 8th that I read the minutes for. But we did share with the community that expressed concern about transportation and our budget. We shared with those that were in attendance and those that watched that we just cannot simply afford to do after the pandemic what we have always done. And the needs of our students are just simply greater than where we used to be. So we have to make some decisions. And I'm saying all this to say it was well received by the community. They understood, and I think you were in attendance, so you do understand too. People just understand that what we've been doing, we can't sustain. And I think that that was painfully obvious in budget, but it was also evident in ad hoc when we spoke about the building use plan. So go back and watch that meeting. It was from the 22nd, I believe, when we talked about that. I just wanted to clarify that we did talk about that, but it was at the last week's ad hoc meeting, not June 8th of the minutes that I just read.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any other last comments or questions? So we will vote on this appropriations resolution later this evening. Thank you. And we'll transition to our last discussion topic for the main part of our meeting, which is going to be on our bylaw review. And I will turn this one over to Mr. Morosky, who's been chairing these efforts through the policy committee.
Thank you, President Lindy. This has been quite a process, and I appreciate every board member's input and work and staying on top of this so that the policy committee can move forward with our recommendations this evening. I also really would love to thank the administration for their input with the superintendent, and then especially Phyllis Davis and Pat Bruckner in the board's office for getting our documents in a timely fashion, getting things turned around real quick, and Dan Hoying, our general counsel, and his staff who have done a ton of work organizing these so that my colleagues could move their way around them. So it was a lot of people and a lot of eyes, and not being want to speak on behalf of the committee, but I will right now. I think Ms. Weinberg, Ms. Bolton, and myself are pretty proud of the work we've done and stand behind our recommendations. That all being said, a goal that I am kind of placing on myself is that, you know, for the next 30 to 40 minutes to like 8 o'clock or so, there's a couple things I would like to accomplish, or the committee would like to accomplish. The first is seeking and receiving the board's approval for what is in green that you have. Now, the documents that you received in your email and the documents that are on board docs are all correct. So what you've seen leading up to this meeting is correct. The packet that is printed at your seat is not, so don't even worry about it. Unless you've sat here and read every word of it since you've been here, it doesn't matter, but this is what you were already emailed. So if you want a hard copy, there it is. But you've seen the correct copies, you know everything that's in there. But there's a hard copy if you want to follow along that way. I'm just going to use my computer because that's how I've been doing it for the past few months or so. So thing number one, there's two things. Thing number one from the committee is we have a set of recommendations that we would like to propose. They are all of the items in green, including Ms. Bolton's addendum, which is a reorganization, a proposed reorganization of the bylaws. That simply serves to help them make more sense. If the guiding sort of the motive is that we have bylaws that help us behave as a governing body in an efficient and effective manner, while also providing a nice roadmap, you know, for a new board member, if they were to come on. I mean, no one would obviously ever vote any of us out of office, but if that happened and a new person came here and they got their big binder like we all did, it would make sense. So we are also recommending, just to repeat, we're recommending Ms. Bolton's proposed reorganization. So that's number one. Number two, there are 5 substantive areas where we felt we were not in a position to make a recommendation on behalf of the board, that they required more discussion. We were tasked with coming up with recommendations, so we did. You've seen a couple drafts of this to get to this point. We believe everybody on the board got a little bit of something that they were suggesting, but probably not everything. But again, there were 5 areas that I'll tee up after we get past the green recommendation. But there are 5 distinct areas that Ms. Bolton, Ms. Weinberg, and myself did not feel comfortable deciding without everybody. So I'll tee those up after this first piece. But firstly, I would just like to know, we would like to know, since you've had time to sit with them at this point and seen the green recommendations, if A, you have anything you would like to add to the green, or B, if you don't see something that you recommended that you would like thrown back in there, or C, if you just flat out don't like our recommendation. And if the goal is D, that we accept the recommendations of the policy committee, and then we can move forward with the discussion. And then I'm going to look at General Counsel Hoying just real quick. You don't need to come up here, but we've never talked about this. I'm assuming that when all is said and done, we'll need a resolution that's okay. But tonight, I think just kind of a nod of like, yeah, the green's fine is good enough, right? Yeah. So I will pause before teeing up the 5 areas that we believe require further discussion.
So, Mr. Borowski, the prompt is, does anybody have any questions or concerns about the green?
Mm-hmm. That's the much more efficient way to say it. Yeah.
No, I don't know.
No,
What you shared was excellent. Mr. Craig.
Just from kind of a procedural thought process on this, because I know there's some things that are actually in the green that are in sections that, based on what Board Member Bolton was recommending as far as a reorg, would be moved to other sections. And so I didn't know procedurally whether it made more sense to discuss the recommendations about the restructure first, or to discuss the green parts first?
Well, think of the restructure as the green part. If you want to, if you go, feel free. Because, you know, again, the final, we will not vote on anything. They're just saying like, yeah, this stuff looks all right. And then Mr. Hoying's team and Ms. Davis will work to get it all for the final kind of package. So yeah, feel free, whichever order, fine.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Other comments or questions about the green? Dr. Moffitt.
Well, I'll just say, I think this was a hefty task. I know I have bit your ear because I read the bylaws and I was trying to follow them. So, and you've been very gracious to me, although I know I've gotten on your last.
That is not true.
But I think that you all did a great job in compiling everything. To be completely honest with you, it's a little bit much to consume in this moment. But I do trust you that you got everyone's thoughts together. So I guess I'm saying, I'm a little confused. I think to accept the green is what we should do and move on. And I do like the new structure, because I did find when I was reading the bylaws, there's just a lot of ambiguity. There's like things here, things there. One thing says you could do it this way. The other thing doesn't say that you can't. So it's really, a lot of spaces where there's just confusion.
Yep.
And maybe they haven't had to do that in the past, because former board members are like, no, go to your bylaws. And then when they looked at them, they're like, oh, wow, they are different. So I think you all did a great job. I'm open to just accepting what you all said, especially if it's compilation of everyone's thoughts.
Yes, yeah, that means a lot. Thank you. And again, you know, just to repeat, if between now and whenever this resolution comes up that we're voting on, finally, something comes up in the green, you have gone through and looked at them again and like, oh, I had one, that's obviously fine. But to get to like the 5 where we think we need to chat, and we may only make it through one of the 5 tonight, I don't know. But anyway, I appreciate it. It means a lot to us.
President Lindy.
Ms. Jones.
Yes, I also want to, excuse me, thank the policy committee and all the other folks who were involved in this. From, you know, at first glance, when you look at the big picture, when you look at all of it together, it looks really good. And only E. Bolton has the patience to sit down and go item by item like she did. And I appreciate that very much. That's a skill I wish I had. So thank you for that. There are a couple of areas, I think from a broad scope perspective, the, excuse me, the areas in green look very good. But there are, for me personally, there are maybe 2, maybe 3 areas in green that I truly am not in agreement with. And so I don't know if you are going to discuss those. One of those 3 I could probably live with, but there are 2 that I just think, for me, well, one of them isn't real clear, the other one I just disagree with. So is the plan to go through these green items tonight for discussion, or what? Help me with that.
The plan, no, and I'd love Ms. Jones to hear what those are, and I will mark them down. So step 1 is to get some sort of agreement that, hey, the green is okay. It looks like, you know, up here for most folks it is. But if there aren't, then now would be the time to tell us what those few are. And then once we get past this part, then I'm going to bring up the 5 items that we're certain there will be lots of discussion. So yeah, if you have a few, I think I know one of them is, but I'll wait.
Okay. Well, do you want me to go ahead and identify the ones? Okay.
Yeah, just make sure. Yeah, tell which code it is.
Okay. Oh my God.
Or just I know where it is. I know where they are. I've looked at this too.
Well, hold on. Let me get. Okay.
No, just tell me, Carolyn. Don't worry about it.
Okay. One of them it's in a membership, 0148, public expression of members.
Okay.
And the in green, it says the board president, when asked to meet with elected officials, that line. Okay, so here's my thought on that. And for me, it is also having had experience in that seat. I think every board member, each of us, has an obligation to the community at large, and to anybody who seeks to talk with us or discuss things with us or whatever. The difference is, in my opinion, is that the board president does have a very distinct duty of being the spokesperson for the board. So in that line, it says that when the board president is asked to speak with elected officials, that they will inform the board and provide updates by the next board meeting. Well, all of us at some time or another have probably spoken with elected officials at some point in time, or other community people or what have you. And there has not been an expectation of reporting on the next business meeting. So I think the statement, for me, and I put it down in green where it says in performance of duties, board members are frequently requested to meet individually. It does say board members are not precluded from meetings with community constituents, no matter who it is. And no one board member, and this is stated somewhere in the bylaws, no one board member can make a decision on behalf of the board. So I think that one statement that identifies the board president who can't speak to the elected official, well, they can speak to elected officials, but are required to inform the board. I think that's, to me, is a little sort of misplaced or whatever, because it really does apply to all of us, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And then I'm going to let Ms. Weinberg respond to that when we get through, if that's all right, Ms. Weinberg, just with the other two. And then I'll let Ms. Weinberg wants to respond. Sorry, President Lady, I kind of took over the moderator role.
No, this is your show.
Okay. And Ms. Bolt, and then Ms.
I was going to respond to.
Okay, let's just get through the three. What's the next one, Ms. Jones?
Okay, the other one is, I don't know specifically what it is, but it's more of it's a broad kind of category. I could be okay with this, but right now I'm confused. It's really not clear to me what the difference is between an assignment and a request for information.
Those are good. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead, keep going.
No, I'm just saying, I don't have an answer for it. I want to hear kind of what the thinking is about it or whatever. For me, that is not clear enough, especially in the section that speaks to the request for information, and it says, the request has to be within a reasonable amount of time. Well, reasonable is in the judgment of the person who's making the request. So, that to me needs a little more clarity.
And those actually are part of the things that need more discussion. So you're good there. So
okay,
yes,
I'm good there.
Yeah, you're good. Let's go to the third one.
Okay, the third one, I can't remember. I have to go back in my files to look. So if somebody else wants to speak, I can. There was one more, and I apologize.
You're all good. Let Ms. Weinberg and Ms. Bolton address the president one.
Okay.
Yes, so in regards to 148, and as it's talking about the board president functions, I do not remember what it exactly stated before. But the reason why I added in the board president when asked to meet with elected officials, dignitaries, or community leaders will inform the board and provide updates by the next board business meeting. If I give the example of, for example, transportation or crossing guards, and let's say our president has a planned meeting with the mayor, just using that as an example, I think the rationale behind that was just to be able to get back to the board to report in one business meeting. In one board business meeting, rather than having that meeting, maybe forgetting to inform us 2 months later, we then come back to the table to say, oh, yes, we had this meeting, but I forgot to inform you all of what happened. So that was my rationale behind that.
Ms. Bolton.
Okay.
Go ahead, Evia.
Can I go ahead?
Nowhere in this does it limit elected school board members, regardless of office or whatever, the opportunity to speak to any constituents that we have.
Correct.
But elected officials, I see as being not constituents, but other office holders who are in a position representing other organizations. And I don't think this should pertain only to the president. I think it should pertain to any member that indeed has conversations in a way. It doesn't mean you're going to go out to dinner and see if you like movies, but if you're talking to another elected official who represents their office and their organization, I think that, you can use judgment as to report back,
Yeah.
but I do believe it doesn't pertain only to the president, it pertains to everybody.
And if I could, I agree with that statement, Ms. Bolton, that it doesn't pertain to just the board president. And so what my suggestion is to not to pull that role out of there, because that rule of thumb holds true for every single board meeting, every single board member. And I think we've had situations where board members have met with officials, with elected officials, and there was no discussion or whatever, and we have a right to do that. But I don't think we should hold the board president to this separate standard of requiring them to report. I understand the nature of the business. It's like, well, transportation, which was a hot topic, and there are other hot topics. It is very important for us to meet with all of our constituents on that, and each of us does that. But we are accountable to the entire board to report anything that is going to move us forward on any kind of decision or forethought or planning effort or whatever. So again, I am saying that should not be limited to just the board president. It should be for all board members.
Thank you. And President Lindy.
Thanks, Mr. Moraski. I just wanted to say I have no concerns whatsoever with the green as it's written. I have no concerns whatsoever to doing exactly what Board Member Jones is suggesting and broadening it.
Yeah.
I think both of those seem super reasonable, and I'm grateful and excited to get on board with either one.
Cool. Yeah, I actually like what you said too, Ms. Jones, which after we hear Mr. Craig, I may ask Mr. Hoying to update that. Mr. Craig?
I think the only thing I would maybe add to it is just that it's like having conversations with regard to board or district, like on behalf of the board or the district. Because I think the way it's phrased now, it says any conversation, which may not be actually what was the intent of what was being talked about. Is more of when speaking about work that involves the district or the board.
Yeah.
Or being a representative of the board in a meeting with an elected official.
Yeah.
Because to Board Member Bolton and Board Member Jones's point, any of us who would speak to an elected official on behalf of the board should bring that information back to the board for us to all take in.
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Moffitt and Ms. Weinberg?
Well, I took it as the part that to me that was clear was when asked to meet. So that means that you're asking in your official capacity as a representative of the board to meet officially. So I took that as, if that is the role of the board president, then that means that that's a formalized meeting and that should be recorded or documented in some manner to all the board members. So I took that as that would be the role and responsibility of the board president to be asked to meet with other elected officials. And because of that, please report that back to the other board members. Now, I do think in addition to that, it should say when any board member is asked to meet in any official capacity as a going to a conference and representing the board at the conference, or going to another committee meeting and you are representing you're there in an official capacity, it should state that you have the responsibility to come back and report that whatever happened to the board members, because it was my understanding that all of us should have the benefit of all the information, even if one or two of us are the representatives at the table. Yeah. So I think it is specifically the responsibility of the board president if he or she is asked in a capacity in that role, but it is also in anyone else's capacity as well. So I'd say that keep that, because unfortunately it may need to be clarified, but then add to that whomever is asked as an elected official.
And that, we agree, and thanks to Ms. Weinberg, that is in the bylaws in green, that precise language. And just one quick point of clarity, I think everybody agrees with Ms. Jones. So Mr. Hoying, if there's another place that could go, great, because I just want to remind everybody that where we are right now is duties of the board president, which is why this says board president.
And I just wanted to add exactly, so that particular portion is for the duties of the president. And if you look in section 0119, duties of the Board of Education, I think that is where we can then add the verbiage that Board Member Jones is referring to.
There's a couple of points, there's a couple of places within the document that it does reference that. Yeah. I have to respectfully disagree, but it's not left up to me. I think the board has to vote on what it is. I think this specifically pulls out the board president in this particular section. It pulls out the board president and sort of suggests that that person or that role is the only one that has to, if they meet with elected officials. We all meet with elected officials. So that's all I'm saying, but that's enough. I'm okay. It's going to come up to a vote anyway. So that
Well, I think everybody takes your suggestion, but again, this section is specifically for the board president. So Mr. Hoying, if we could take Ms. Weinberg's suggestion and put something that's similar / identical to this. Board members, when asked to meet, identical, why not? And put it in what section did you say? It's right before this one, right? 119, did you say?
Yes.
Yeah, so.
119.
Mr. Hoying, we
actually are to be exact.
Right.
In section 119, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, duties of the Board of Education. So, a similar / identical paragraph that reads, Board of Education members, and then the same wording, so that it's in both.
It's under R.
It's already there?
Under R, on 119, to report back to the board within one board meeting.
And that was the one, right, and that was the one Ms. Weinberg added about the CRC for me or whatever. I'm saying add the exact same, or just add it into R, why not? Yeah,
yes,
great.
I would agree.
Thanks, yeah, perfect.
There.
All right, good work, everybody. And you had a third one, Ms. Jones?
No, the second one I think is much more urgent, and that is really bringing some clarification around what is an assignment and what is a request for information.
And we are going to talk about that if we have
time.
time.
That's what you said. I'm sorry.
You're good. Okay. You're good, Mr. Linney. President Linney.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moravsky. I was going to say, when Ms. Jones if we're finished with those three and we're in the context of the green and what questions and comments we'll have about the green, I have one when it's appropriate.
Go for it.
Thank you. So one of the things, first of all, I'm ready to support all of the green. So I wanted to comment on one piece that I think was taken out that I had commented on or used somewhere, which was this idea of admonition. In the current bylaws, there's a definition of admonition and there's a definition of censure. I think in the proposals that come through, I think that the definition of censure is better, and it was a higher threshold, requires 2/3 of the board, and it's clear about what that means. That's one of many reasons why I'm supporting all the green. I'm also happy to support this if admonition comes out. The reason I like admonition is that it gives the board something that is short of censure. So if censure comes with a loss of some privileges, say committee assignments or say board travel or say whatever, it seems like it would be helpful, just like when you're running a classroom or if you're a parent, you have like a series of escalating consequences. You don't jump right to the extreme with nothing in between. And so I like the idea that there is this kind of middle ground, which doesn't actually have any bad things that happen other than a public statement. Now, I think part of the reason I'm still very happy to support the green, even if it doesn't change, is just because we took out the definition doesn't mean that that couldn't still happen if the board decides that that's what it wants to do. I think I just wanted to voice over that, because I think what I hope can happen as we go forward is that expectations are clearer for everybody. And that when, in the off chance that something happens and those expectations are not followed, things happen. And things happen in a calibrated, appropriate, very, very clear way that have room to escalate or de-escalate, depending on the choices that individual folks make. And so I have read all of these. I listened to every policy committee meeting where you all have discussed this. And I know that one of the things that came up in some of those meetings is feeling like admonition wasn't necessary. I do think there is a strong reason to have something that is formal, but is not as severe as censure, because it gives the board more room to operate. But again, I fully support the green, because I think we can do that anyway, even if we take out the definition.
And for some, just for folks that weren't at the meetings or didn't have a chance to watch them all, the reason the committee, Mr. Lindy touched on this, the reason the committee took admonition out and settled on defining censure, which before, just so folks are aware, if a board member, they acted unruly or acted outside of the board, or the board votes on something, approves it, and then goes out in the community and says, I don't support it. It's said, we always will of the board, the conversation we always come back to at times. There was no real process for what that, how do you address that? And so now there is, which is great, to Mr. Lindy's point, and a lot, if not all of that process was suggested by Mr. Lindy. We took nearly all of it minus the admonition. And the reason was, not to repeat, but just so this give a little context, again, in case you didn't get to see all the meetings, was that we felt that to get to censure, part and parcel of getting to censure was this sort of admonition process, which is just essentially like a one-on-one, hey, I didn't think that was very cool. 99% of the time, that works. But then there's a step 2 and then step 3 being censure. So that's why we didn't recommend it. But if anybody else has the same opinion as Mr. Lindy, like Ms. Jones' point brought up, we just, change it. We're open to it. I don't. So if anyone else, I just want to give it that context too, because no. Okay. So I'm going to close the door on the green for now, unless, Mr. Craig.
I just want clarification. For 0170, we are just removing, the green is to remove it, correct?
Yes. 0170 is, it's all duplicative.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yes. The green is to get rid of 0170. Yes. Yeah. I'll recommend to rescind entire policy. Easy peasy. So last call, and then I'm going to move on to a couple of our hot button topics. I think we have one. Now we're going to take a couple of these are similar. Okay. So, I think, let me get back to my notes here. So hold on. In 100, and I'm just going to outline them, and 1, 2, 3. I'm going to outline them, and then I'm going to make a suggestion of where we start. In 100, there are 2 definitions that we feel need to be discussed. The first is assignment. Back to Ms. Jones, there it is. And the second one is down in the C's for consent eligible items. Those are 2. The third is in 110. If you look at 110, there is a long piece about, hold on a second, curriculum that we wanted for discussion. It's a long paragraph on curriculum. So that's the third. On 120, which is the next in the series, this is dealing largely with, back to Ms. Jones, request for information, who the board may or may not speak with outside of the superintendent directly. And then 160 unsurprisingly, is regarding agendas and putting items on agendas, et cetera. So at the heart of this is all a very similar issue. Communication at the heart. I mean, they're all unique, I realize. So my suggestion would be to start with the definitions, because I feel having some alignment on assignment and consent eligible item will help us deal with agendas, will help us deal with the curricular piece, and will also help us deal with the communication between us and the administration. So unless anyone has a better idea, I say we tackle consent eligible item and assignment. Ms. Bolton, or?
I was just going to say to Mr. Morosky, I think whatever we can do, 8 o'clock-ish, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll finish all of them.
Yeah, well, maybe. Ms. Bolton, what do you think?
Yes, I do think we need to begin to practice consent agenda. I believe that for a long time. The reality is, I think the listing here is appropriate for consent agenda. It's not all inclusive, but I think it's a good start. The reality, as we discussed, I think in policy, is that for us to adopt a consent agenda approach, we have to actually have the superintendent, the treasurer, and everybody else actually change even the formatting or the approach to the recommendations from the superintendent and the report from the treasurer. Because we're never going to say, okay, the whole treasurer's report is consent agenda. No, that's probably never going to happen with this board or any board in the future. So there's a way to address it. Plus, you don't want to use a consent agenda to do more things out of the public. And sometimes it can lead to that, but you do want to do it so that you can expedite action that does not require long discussion or what have you. So I like the list that everybody's come up with, but again, it's going to require institutional, bureaucratic, administrative changes as much as anything.
President Lindy?
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. I agree with everything that Ms. Bolton said. I'd like everybody to write that down. I think what I would add to it, I think this doesn't say like consent required items. It says consent eligible items. So it leaves us lots of room to grow into this and not get there overnight, because I do think it's a whole process. The last thing I wanted to add, and this is just from listening to the policy meetings, I think there was some concern that board members wouldn't be able to, that this would somehow keep items out of being a part of public discussion. And I think that when this process is up and running in a board, I'm not saying our board, but the way it would work is that any board member could ask for any item to come out of the consent agenda and be placed on the agenda as a separate item for discussion. So it is incredibly empowering for board members. There's literally nothing is off limits for public discussion and vote. But to Ms. Bolton's point, I do think it takes a change of a whole series of systems. But I think there's a future out there for us and for our district and for our administration where we make better use of everybody's time. Staff, public, board members, we're more efficient, we're more focused, and any board member that wants to make sure we talk and give airtime to a particular issue has the ability to do that. So I'm excited about this, and I appreciate all the work that you all have done.
Awesome, thanks. Anyone else on the consent eligible items, or if not, the other on definition, then we can close the door on 110 or 100 rather, is the definition for assignment. A request from the board to the treasurer or superintendent to respond with a presentation or formal written response or directing the administration to take action. Assignments must be made during public meetings and may not be made in executive session. That's what's come out of this process, by the way. So we're largely okay, but we did not feel comfortable just saying, hey, this is, yeah, presently. And then Dr. Go ahead.
So can we talk about examples maybe, because this is an area for me particularly that has just caused some consternation and I'd like clarity on. I think to ask the administration or the treasurer's office or the auditor to do something is an action. So some people will say, well, that if you even ask for information, a collection of information or data, that's an action and that's an assignment. Whereas I might be just saying that's just a request for information. So I'd like some examples so that we can get out of ambiguity. I don't think it has historically been a problem, but I just want us to clarify.
And so I think, and now I'll ask my committee members or anyone else to jump in because I'm not going to pretend to have, the answer for this. But I do think that this one, is sort of part and parcel of the request for information piece that we also wanted to talk about because it's really like what we're talking about, right? Is what is the difference here? And so I don't necessarily want to jump around, but I'm going to pull it up real quick and see if Ms. Bolton or Ms. Weinberg want to add anything to this because they're like two sides of the same coin, right? You can't really have one without the other. So in some sense, we really maybe should talk about both, but because I hear what you're saying. Ms. Bolton, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk historically. An assignment can only be made in public. A request for information doesn't have to be made in public. An assignment can only be made by really maybe an individual, but only among the consensus of the group, whereas a request for information is done by an individual. And the request for information is made of the people of whom we're allowed to ask for information. And that information request goes to that particular person, but it is done with the full knowledge of all members of the board. And the response by that person that has been asked of the question or information responds to all members of the board. So an assignment is actually wanting action. Now, granted, putting information together is some form of action, but not what we're really talking about. Request for information is very different than actual assignment because of the processes required. But also the additional piece is the request for information is formal and known to all. Whereas a board member calling the superintendent on the phone or the treasurer and say, hey, could you give me an update on whatever? That is something that's done outside the knowledge of all board members, okay? So it's different than a formal request for information, but you might be, that expedites things. It might be quick. You need to know it. So it's almost like there's two different kinds of requests for information. The formal one has worked for year after year after year. The assignment, and I think we've gotten very diligent about the assigned piece, and part of the assignment goes into that issue out of committee, which is action items.
And that's 120 A, B, C, and D, which is I'm gonna sneak in. Yep.
Action. You've got request for information, a formal one,
Yep.
as well as the informal.
Yep.
And that's the differentiation we have to find among those four, I think.
And the language that's unique in the bylaws, and I'm sneaking in a third one here, and then we'll be finished, President Lindy. But I do think these kind of have to be talked about together. The language that calls this out in these recommended bylaws are a request from the board to the treasurer, just to use the words in the bylaws to support Ms. Bolton's point, a request from the board. And then in 120, A, B, C, and D are all talking essentially about the same thing. It begins a request for information from an individual board member. Should be directed to superintendent and treasurer and copied to all board members. And then you see that piece, the superintendent shall acknowledge receipt in 24 to 48 hours if possible. For responses that are voluminous, I'm not going to read you all this, but essentially the difference is full board versus one person. Mr. Craig?
And I think this is where sometimes the confusion happens though, is that a request for information that's not already compiled, right? So like if you're requesting information that is not already readily accessible and or readily be able to gather, with reasonable haste. Is that something that we feel comfortable to say there could be a response back to say that needs to be formalized for us to put that together as a assignment, or is that something that stays a request for information? Because I think that is where the difficulty is not on the easy ones where it's like, do this or not do this, or, hey, how many schools do we have? But it's the ones where we're asking for information that requires some level of compilation.
And if I may, Ms. Bolton, if I may, just for a second, I'll kick it to you. Is that okay? So the conversation that we had in our last policy committee meeting, and it was there, Mr. Hoying can attest to this, and I'm just going to replay it for folks, because this came up. And you'll see language included in 120B that no board member or member of the public requesting the full document will be denied such request regardless of the length of the document. And what came up was the example precisely of what you're talking about, that let's say somebody asks the superintendent for a voluminous document, and voluminous is, we used that word around 7 times in our last policy meeting, and it was most enjoyable for me. And so you'll find the word voluminous in the bylaws a couple times if you look closely enough, and Oxford commas, Dr. Little. Anyhow, if it is voluminous, let's say it's going to take forever. The superintendent can say that's going to take a real long time. The board member can say, well, yeah, but I need it right now to, let's say, inform my vote on X, Y, or Z, and I don't have the information. And that might be the end of the conversation, or it might not. Or then the superintendent or someone come back and go, you know, I really just can't do it. And then the board will say, well, then I'm going to make it an assignment. I mean, that's just an example. It's not obviously codified in here. We're not going to codify every conversation, but just something that came up. That did come up.
If I can just give one little clarification also on that, like for things that are not already created, though, I think it's the question that I guess maybe in my head I'm.
Gotcha. No, yeah, I gotcha. And then we'll move on. We're about to wrap with Dr. Ms. Jones.
Yes, thank you. I 100% believe what Yvonne said when she gave the historical context, that I understand that. I also understand that people have different needs in terms of information or data or whatever it is. Another major concern, and I think I'm agreeing with Vice President Craig about, you know, when you talk about information that's readily available, that's one thing. And I think, you know, the superintendent, treasurer, whoever we're directing that to could easily say, oh, that's readily available. I can have it to you in 24 hours or 48 hours. But if it is a request for information that is not readily available, I think there has to be a courtesy given to the people who we're asking to do the volumes of work that we are asking. And I believe that the people say the information is needed. I get that. But if you think about 7 of us, if all 7 of us did that on a regular basis, our administration would be spending a whole lot of time just trying to get all this information to board members. And if it's to drive a decision or a process or whatever, I mean, usually on our agendas, we have enough planning time where we know kind of, you know, the subjects that we're looking at. I don't think it's out of line to ask for information or data, whatever it is we need to help make those decisions. I do think, though, that sometimes as we're thinking about this, it's the spur of the moment kinds of things where we're asking administration to disrupt their work to address a request that could take a considerable amount of time out of their day-to-day work. And again, I've listened very intently. I hear what people are saying, and I want to respect that. I really do. But for me, it is, I don't know. I don't know how you draw the line between, you know, what's considered a lot of information or little information. You know, if people have a question, they have a question. You know, I don't know. I don't know that I have an answer for that.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And then Ms. Bolton, and then I'm going to try to summarize this a little bit and then we'll close out if that's okay.
Very quickly, we've mentioned the idea of notifying that the receipt has been made, meaning we've received the information. But I think it falls to the administration then to tell us this, I can't get it back to you in a record time. We eliminate all that 72 hours and 2 days or, 5 minutes or what have you. So I think I don't know that you can codify all that. The receipt is one thing, and then the administration will tell you this is not right now something I can do. But I do want to separate when an elected official requests information. Something might have to be generated. We are not members of the public doing sunshine laws. I mean, the reality is, member of the public, we can tell the public, listen, we can give you the documents we've got. We're not forced to create documents necessarily, but for an elected official, yeah, you might have to do that. But I think it falls to the administration to tell us that it'll take a while. I think Member Weinberg's the one that put it in about the receipt, so that you are notified, and also keeping the record later of assignments. We still need to clarify the issue of actions during committees, though.
Well, those were included in the green.
Okay, good.
So
I'm liking them.
yeah. All right. So what I heard, President Lindy, and then I'll pass it back to you. Thank you so much for letting us kind of around here. We have first reminder. We'll discuss the curriculum, and we kind of skipped ahead to 120. So I think we've gotten a good start there. And then agendas. But I hear that everyone is fine with the consent eligible items piece. I didn't hear any recommendations to the contrary of A, B, C, and D in 120 in assignment. If there are any, please send them to me. Otherwise, we'll green those at our next meeting. We don't meet till August though. So we're going to go ahead, just to repeat, we're going to go ahead and green Mr. Hoying. We're going to green consent eligible items. And then if there are no suggestions made to me via email or otherwise on assignment in 120 A, B, C, and D by August, so it's like a month we have, we'll green those, and then we will just leave 160 agendas and 110 curriculum for the next time. But thank you all so much. That's a heck of a lot of work.
Mr. Moraski, the 120 A, B, C, and D, would you just direct me to what those are one last time?
That's the one, the request information piece.
To where, in what?
It's right at the top. So, I'm sorry. It's 122.1 member powers. Sorry.
Just bear with me for a second. So we're going to go to 120. We got a lot of paper here.
122.1 member powers.
122.1.
Yep.
Okay.
So A, B, C, and D, that's what we were just talking about in conjunction with the definition for assignment.
And are you saying that we're making 122.1 green?
No. I'm saying we're going to leave that red, but if I don't receive any additional feedback on those by August, then we'll bring it back as a green recommendation. But feel free to send, whatever. And don't forget that they're in the
by August or by July 17th?
August. We don't have a July meeting.
A policy committee meeting.
Yep. That's what I'm saying. That's the problem. So we're not meeting until August.
I see.
Dr. Muppet? Or sorry.
So I have a question around 122.1. It says under D, a board member may consult directly with general counsel or the internal auditor of the district. Are we excluding the treasurer?
Are we what?
Are we excluding the treasurer?
No, the treasurer's up at the tippy top.
So I just didn't know why we put out general counsel and the auditor, why we put that in there. Did we need to specify? And not just the people that directly report to board?
Why did we what? I'm sorry.
Why do we have D as opposed to just
because historically that had been practice. And as we've kind of reorganized how we're communicating, we've sort of, and it was a belief of some that lost sight of that, but that's
No, okay.
and historically how it had been. And so that's why that's in there. And then also, I just don't want you all to forget, I draw your attention to it, that request for information also has its own definition that you're going to want to look at when you're thinking more about 122. Okay. And then lastly, President Lynn, I will be quiet. This will just save time though. The next time we talk about this is, so everyone is aware, the other section is 110, letter U. It's all red. You'll see it right there, to adopt curriculum. We didn't talk about that at all, and we're not going to, but so you can be ready. 110, letter U, excuse me. And then 160, and it's 165.1, regular meetings, and you'll see it's the big section in red under 165.1. So we didn't talk about that either.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky, for all your work on this. I think as a matter of process, would you be, we might be able to keep this moving if we used part of the July 17th meeting to pick up this conversation.
Yeah, we don't need to do in policy.
So when
yeah.
you all get to policy, we're
We don't
even
need to do that.
further. That way it's not into, 2027 by the time we're done.
So let's, yeah, yeah, I don't know why I was, yeah, that, of course.
Okay.
So yeah, we'll talk, we don't need to take that.
Okay, and so then I just want to make sure too that you all did so much work on this. And the definition of request for information that's in here is not easy. And I just wanted to commend you all for the work that you did. Is that on the table as something that
It
we're
is,
reading
and
tonight? Or are we bringing
No,
that
we're
up
good.
with
We can
July
move on.
17th?
That one was kind of baked in my head. I was trying to combine things that were similar, like 122 that we were talking and the definition. And then Dr. Moffitt reminded me that we should rope an assignment. We already did that part.
Yeah.
But the other part is this definition. So yeah, we'll
So
want feedback.
If people have feedback on the definition that's in here, they should send it to you.
Or any of the other things that we didn't talk about yet.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks again to General Counsel team and Phyllis and Pat and everybody. Thanks y'all. And the committee especially. Y'all are great.
All right. So thank you, everybody. We're going to keep on moving and try to get folks home as soon as we can do so well. We're on to resolutions. We have 4 of them. The first one is going to be a final annual appropriations resolution for this fiscal year from Ms. Bolton.
Thank you. Yes, on behalf of the Finance Committee, I would like to propose the resolution regarding fiscal year 2022-2023 final annual appropriation resolution. I propose and we hope for adoption.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Vice President Craig. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton? Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Sorry, Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, we have a temporary appropriations resolution for this next fiscal year, also from Ms. Bolton.
Proposed resolution fiscal year 2023-24 temporary appropriation resolution, which you had the treasurer explain to us earlier this evening. Propose and hope for adoption.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any discussion on the temporary appropriations resolution? Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton? Aye. Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky? Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, we have a third. We'll get some discussion or context in a second, but could we have a motion to clarify board policy 5511.01 on school uniforms?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any discussion on the proposed motion, Mr. Morosky?
Yeah, so this is what we were, Ms. Bolton had me clarify a little bit about during the meeting minutes. And so just again, a reminder that schools have long had the ability to have a uniform if they want to and decide what the parameters of that policy would be. This is CPS policy 5511.01. And so this policy reinstates itself as it rescinded during COVID. And the only thing I want to call out, I'm not big, as you all know, about reading things to you, but the one thing I want to call out are the stipulations that schools must do to reinstate a uniform policy. They must have approval of the school's LSDMC, Local School Decision Making Committee, to re-implement the policy. They must ensure that parents, particularly parents of students who are new to the school, an appropriate time to purchase a uniform for their student. And lastly, they must provide opportunities for low-income families to access free or low-cost uniforms.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Any other discussion on the motion? Dr. Moffitt.
I do have a question. Would it be responsible to put something in our policy around discipline for not being in uniform? And because I have seen it where I just don't want our students to be disciplined if they don't have the uniform. So I don't know if we need to make that adjustment at the policy level or what. And that's the only other caveat I was wondering about is discipline because of the lack of. I know we said we need to make sure that they have access to, but how are we doing that? How does that work? And then what happens when they don't have? So that's my only concern.
Thank you. I'll respond. And then I would look for somebody else who maybe is smarter about this than me to add their 2 cents. My opinion would be that it doesn't necessarily have a home in the policy, but it does in the code of conduct. I do think you're correct. I think the sentiment is correct. I don't know that it belongs in the policy as much as maybe the code of conduct. That would just be my opinion.
Thank you.
But I think we should remember that, because we are going to be talking about it. We were talking about health and safety today. So I think it is something that we flag. And Dr. Little he gave a great presentation today on a couple items that, there are numerous reasons as a former dean of students that a student at a uniform school, there are numerous reasons why a student might not have a uniform. It's not very cut and dry. So that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Vice President Craig.
I just want to point out in the policy itself, the 5511.01, it does say that students shall not suffer an academic penalty, i.e. in school suspension, out of school suspension, or students in home for failure to wear the uniform.
Yeah.
It may just be need to clarify what is the kind of, or what schools can do or can't do on that, but it does provide that at least.
No, and that's where I would belong in the code, I believe. And you have the right in the policy, so it's there backed up, and then the procedure will be in the code probably.
Well, that speaks to academics.
Thank you,
but-
Mr. Morosky. Dr. Moffitt.
It speaks to academics, but I've seen that that's not enough. And so I'm wanting to know, should we mandate that at our level for clarity? That's all I'm saying. And we can track the data, but I just want to make sure that they're not suffering academically, but their discipline records may not reflect. I don't know. I'm bringing it up. I'm bringing it up here.
Excuse me with my mic. Dr. Moffitt, I think it's a good question. Do you want to propose any language?
I don't know, but I think that just should be something that we think about. And again, I want to ensure that we give the schools the ability to institute a uniform if they want to. We state in there that no student should be penalized due to low income, and that the schools should be able to compensate that. But then the next step is the discipline of that, because they don't have. That's concerning to me. We acknowledge that we need to make some concessions, but what else are we doing to ensure that that's not happening? And then if the student is allowed to stay in school because of the lack of a uniform, what message is that sending? So again, I think again, I'm not trying to open up a rabbit hole, but I have experienced where it doesn't have enough teeth, and I just want to ensure that it has teeth to make certain that our students are not being disciplined because they don't have a uniform and they show up at school or sit back home, and it has happened.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Ms. Bolden.
I'm really confused now. If we have schools that have uniforms, it's not optional to wear the uniform or not wear the uniform, right? I mean, if your school says you're going to have a uniform, now we're letting schools decide that, rightfully so. I think that's cool, but I don't know how. If you're going to have a uniform policy, the young people have to wear the uniform.
We'll do more, Mrs. Weinberg.
I think the question might have been, and I'm not quite sure, Board Member Moffitt, yes, the school has stated that they have a uniform policy. But example, you have a child who has forgotten on a particular day, Monday, and the child is disciplined for that. I think that's your question of making sure, because it has happened, that children aren't being disciplined for something they can't control. Maybe their parent, they weren't able to wash the uniform. Maybe they truly forgot. It's a whole list of things.
Superintendent? Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg.
So a couple of things, and I think the challenge is all of the above are true. So the first, and as I think everyone knows, this is something that came up because schools have come back now and said they would like to reinstitute their uniform policies, primarily our high schools that discontinued right after COVID. In the policy as read, there is not an academic penalty. There should not be an academic penalty to the students. The hard part about uniforms, once you go the route of uniforms, then there's more work that has to be done around why a child is in uniform, why they're out of uniform. Because if you don't have something that serves as a reason or as a consequence, I should say, then there really is no motivation to wearing the uniform. So it's really, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So one of the recommendations that we would have for schools, and to Dr. Moffitt's point, because I've lived this world, I am sure that our district is no different, that there were students that were sent home, there were students that were put in in-school suspension, there were students that were put in ALC. There were a lot of different reasons, I'm sure, that students were disciplined for uniforms. However, there is a difference in a child that does not have a uniform and a child that chooses not to wear a uniform. And so at the school level, that becomes something that we really do have to work with differently. What many of the schools do as we dig into what happens around uniforms, schools have worked with partners to provide uniforms for students that don't have them. For our students that are housing insecure, that is something that we provide for students through Project Connect. There are schools that provide extra uniform shirts in schools. So there are different ways to get to, there's schools that have washers and dryers in schools, so there's with washing, helping to wash uniforms. So there are a lot of different ways. However, if we are going to reinstitute a policy, it handicaps a school to say that there cannot be any consequences for it. I do think it's important that we monitor the data and that we also really work with schools around, work with families around making sure that everyone is going back to the uniform policy and there's a day certain that students would need to be in uniform so that everyone has the same level of expectation. So it's something that I think administratively we work through. I do believe, I concur that it is something that we would need to address, even as a caveat in the student code of conduct.
Thank you, Superintendent. Anybody who's not gone, want to go, or we'll call the vote? Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton? Aye. Craig?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, we have a fourth and final resolution. It's going to come from Mrs. Weinberg.
I have a resolution approving students eligible for subsidy reimbursement in lieu of transportation for 2023-2024 school year. I present this resolution as written.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Is there a second? Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any discussion? Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton? Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Moving on to our Superintendent of Schools report. Mrs. Weinberg, have any retirements this evening?
Yes, we do. We have a list of names. I'm going to, of course, first read the certificated. We have Patricia J. Boskin, a teacher from RSA Ezra Charles. Diane M. Doctor, a teacher from Evanston. Carrie A. Ferguson, a teacher from Ethel M. Taylor. Amy L. Graff, a teacher from Evanston. Bernadette Higgins, an intervention specialist from Saylor Park. Michael A. Jones, a teacher from Kilgore Service. And Valicia A. Kelly, a teacher from Hughes. We also have Sally C. McClone, a teacher from Silverton. Jennifer H. McNeil, a secondary assistant principal from Hughes High School. Lisa C. Munoz, a teacher from Dater High School. Cheryl L. Reese, a teacher from Mount Airy. Tracy L. Sheridan, a teacher from Roselawn. Jennifer S. Smith, a teacher from Douglas. Angie Ward, a teacher from Dater Montessori. We then have from our civil service, we have Jane Ackerson, a paraprofessional from Roselawn. Gwen Ackers, a paraprofessional from Woodward. Elise Booker, a paraprofessional from Roselawn. Mary Brown, a paraprofessional from Mount Airy. Samuel Eatman, a paraprofessional from the Satellite Program, Janet Huff, a paraprofessional from Midway, Stephen Penning, a security assistant from Sailor Park, Barbara Poole, a paraprofessional from College Hill, Eddie Rios, a paraprofessional from Cheviot, and then we have Starlene White, a paraprofessional from Dater. So we would like to thank all of these individuals for their service, commitment to this district, and of course to the students, and we wish them all of the best in their endeavors.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Motion to adopt the superintendent's recommendations for this evening.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President Craig. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Any discussion on the superintendent's recommendations? Ms. Bolton?
Yes, and this might pertain to the treasurer's report later on. I was confused or concerned, and maybe I missed it on the wonderful news regarding our settlement regarding our unions. I think that was great, but I don't recall that we had an opportunity, not that we would change this or have a different opinion, but I don't recall that the board had an opportunity to more fully discuss the granting, properly so, of those settlements and the percentage to our unrepresented folks. I just don't remember that came up in the discussion where we usually have that discussion. And I know tonight I believe we're voting on it tonight in some way, shape, or form on both the superintendent and the treasurer's report. And I just wouldn't want us to, maybe I missed it, which is very possible, but I don't recall that we had a discussion about that when we had a board discussion. Not that this would change or not that I would be voting for it, but I wouldn't want at least the precedent that this would establish. Indeed it does, and it may not be a precedent, it just may be something that I somehow missed.
Is it a question for the group
The question is,
or for the administration?
I don't recall that we had a board discussion about the percentages regarding, which is action and tradition. I don't recall that we had about the unrepresented when we were talking about it before. And again, perhaps I missed it.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Responses from others? Superintendent?
Yeah, just clarity for questions. So is that unrepresented staff members, or is that unrepresented staff members that have a contract that includes the language in their contract?
It would pertain to all.
And counsel, you may want to come forward in terms of this particular part of the question.
That'd be great.
Right, because there are several contracts that the language in the contract essentially says that whatever is received by CAS is also received by those individuals. So it becomes specific contract language that's already written. And so I believe, if I'm remembering correctly what was written in the document, that's exactly what it showed, but I will have our general counsel to address at least that portion of it, or what portion may be different. But there are those with contract that language is written into their contract.
That language is not included in all the.
I think that's what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Could you say that again?
Yeah, the language about the COLA automatically is included in some contracts, but not all.
Right, and so it's in some, but not all.
That's right.
And I don't recall that we had that difference or discussion. But again, I'm not suggesting we hold this up or to be wrong. I'm just suggesting that I don't recall that discussion with the whole board.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any other responses either to Ms. Bolton's comment or other questions they want to raise? I'll just say for my part, I'm glad we're doing it for everybody. I think that we have an enormously hardworking staff here. I think education is the most undervalued profession in the United States, and I'm glad we can do all our small part to do the best we can.
And as a person living on a retirement from a lifelong education career, I can testify, and I'm happy to have as many people as possible. But my point is, this was not a discussion that the board had, and I think the board should have had the discussion. I'm not trying to change any actions today, but it's something we did not do.
Thank you.
I do think, thank you, Board Member Bolton. I do think moving forward that would be something for us to add as a part of conversation. This was something that came up last year when we got to COLA.
And it was decided at that point that those individuals were grandfathered in, with the exception of those that started at a certain time, which
2
happened
weeks
to have been
before.
May. So those were the individuals that were removed. So this year we followed the common practice that has been followed in the district for a period of time, with the exception of last year because of when those individuals started. If it is something that does need to be a separate conversation, it's something that we bring back because we followed common practice for the district.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Any other discussion on the superintendent's recommendations before we vote? Ms. Wagner, would you just kidding? Dr. Moffitt?
I do have a question. I think last year we talked about the time limit. Was it 1 year that they had been here? A year? Or we talked,
I think it was 6 months.
Yeah, I believe it was 6 months.
It was 6 months. I believe the ask was 6 months. It became up because of when I started, actually. And I started in May, and many individuals started after that. So in terms of the conversation, I believe the conversation came to 6 months, but we would have to go back and look at the cross-reference of what the determination was at that point, because we followed the common practice for district at that time as well.
and it's effective August 1st, right? I think that's what the
It
word is.
depends on the contract. So some contracts end July 1, or they would be effective July 1, and some are August 1.
Thank you very much. Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig? Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Do we have a motion to adopt the treasurer's report this evening?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Any discussion or questions on the treasurer's report? Ms. Bolton?
Just a question, point of clarification. Spent a great deal of time reviewing contracts that went, and did great jobs. Previous contracts, and then of course, then another couple hundred come forward. Wanted to know the status of the contracts we're about to vote on now, whether or not that same kind of review took place, or will it take place later, even though we're voting on these tonight, or can we have an update from the treasurer or the superintendent as we get ready to do these contracts? And they're warranted, I understand, but again, I would hate that we only use the pro forma, very important procedure there and not using it here. So if you can just update us, that would be great.
So the practice that we did provided information to this information. So we made sure any decision to terminate a relationship was not carried forward with this. So we put checks and balances in place to double check to make sure nothing slipped through. And if you notice, you now look at key performance indicator language in your in the treasurer's report, so you know how they're going to be measured. There's a little bit of room for improvement on some of it, and we'll continue to work on that. Excuse me, my allergies are killing me. So the practice is informing the process instead of being out of fact.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Treasurer Wagner. Ms. Bolton, did you have other questions?
No, just that pertains to what many of these nights. So I just.
Okay, Ms. Bolton, other question, the treasurer's recommendations, treasurer's report. Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote, please?
Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge the administrative team on processing hundreds in a very short window of time to get it into this treasurer's report. So thank you to everybody. Ms. Bolton.
Aye.
Mr. Craig.
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt.
Yes.
Mr. Morosky.
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg.
Yes.
President Lindy.
Yes, and thank you to the treasurer's team for all of the hard work that the treasurer mentioned. Okay, we are entering this back section of our agenda. We have 3 board matters items this evening. Dr. Moffitt, do you want to talk about recognizing Leah Powell?
Sure. So I was informed by, I sit on the executive committee for the Cincinnati LACP, and they sent out a notice honoring that Lee Etta Powell passed away at the age of 93, and she was significant to our district because she was the very first African-American superintendent in Cincinnati Public Schools, one of the 3 largest districts in Ohio. And so I'm actually proposing that we do some sort of resolution just to honor her contributions. A little bit about her is that she was our very first African-American superintendent. Her success and reputation extended to higher education, where Dr. Powell was one of 2 African-American tenured professors in the School of Education at the Georgetown Washington University in Washington, D.C. There's a whole litany of other information about her and her accomplishments. And she was actually very noted for opening up doors and being a door opener for others. And she said to that point, I will be a door opener if it will ensure that African Americans and all students receive a fair, equitable, and quality education, and that scholars in graduate schools specifically have a fair chance of completing their research and successfully defending their dissertations. So I'm kind of proposing, don't know if it's an assignment or a request for information or what, but that we formally do a resolution honoring Dr. Lee Etta Powell as the first African American superintendent.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moffitt. We emailed about this briefly, but I thought this was a wonderful idea. And I think we could probably ask the administration to write up a resolution like we've passed in the past and share it with the family. Were you thinking of the family, Dr. Moffitt?
Yes, we can definitely talk about that. I would love to invite them or at least have them virtually join us so that we can, but then I do know that she's got a litany of other professionals that she worked with here in the district that probably could say some kind words as well.
Yeah. Any concerns or objections to taking that forward? I think we could make that an assignment. I think it's a great idea. Thank you. We'll move to item 2 from Ms. Bolton on Metro.
Yes. As we know, we have, I believe it's called an addendum regarding our relationship for this coming year with Metro/SORTA, and wanted to make sure that board members have asked the questions that they need to ask, or the points or interests. As I recall, last year and the year before, we put us together and helped administration find certain answers to certain questions, whether it was what days before, what hours in the school day, how extensive would be these passes, how possible would it be to get within certain distance of the 15 high schools that we have. I remember last year or year before they even measured necessarily the accepted the regular lines and how close the stops were. We talked earlier about whether or not there's possibility of Metro buses being able to enter campus areas or somehow adjust in some small way during the morning and afternoon time to reach so that they are closest to the high schools rather than the kids being walking through the business district. I know we've had some questions about what kind of cards, what kind of technology, is there any kind of opportunity for us to be able to mix and somehow interface would be one of the issues. So I don't know if there's a way we could put a list together. I don't know the level or the current progress from the administration in dealing with that addendum, which General Counsel always says is not really a contract, but it is the addendum. And there are a lot of specific things, and a lot of things got changed last year through the efforts of the superintendent and others trying to watch things more carefully. In the year before that, there were adjustments made as well. I just think that whether it's us being able to know the unique ridership, I think that's important, and what their technology is, what their communication that sometimes has been lacking with us and keeping us apprised of what's going on. So just didn't know where administration was regarding putting together that Metro addendum with Metro and bringing it back to the board for either further discussion or whatever. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Bolton. And I know Ms. Weinberg has a...
I just wanted to add on that, and thank you, Board Member Bolton, for bringing up the whole Metro. And I know that it was requested, whether through email or was requested at a meeting. I thought that we asked for Metro to also come to one of our meetings to present. I would love to bring that back up for an additional discussion as well.
We can come to that also. I think it sounds like there are two inputs from Ms. Bolton's question. I know that Ms. Day circulated a request for input from board members. That sounds like you're asking about both that and about the administration's perspective on the addendum.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Superintendent?
I think it would, thank you. I think it would be very beneficial, as we discussed, I think in the last meeting, to have that list of information that's being circulated, because the asks that we had from before for the addendum, we made sure that those asks were included. We have had some follow-up with Metro because the communication has been going to an entity within our transportation team, but that information has not been forwarded on as we've requested. So I think we've gotten that clarified. It was not until the end of the school year, and I think that was the finance committee meeting that we got the unique ridership numbers, simply because we don't get those numbers until the very end of the year, because that's the time that the passes are no longer valid. And so we will also be able to provide, there was a cross-reference as well, so we will also be able to provide the numbers for the rebate that comes back to us from Metro because of the unused passes. And I don't want to speak the number, but it is in excess of $1 million that comes back to us for the passes that have not been used. So just want to add that as well. So I think that that list would be helpful for us as we're doing the alignment and any other conversations that we need to have with Metro, so that we're seeing to the will of the board.
So are you saying, Superintendent, you have not gotten yet a list of the consolidated board responses? Okay, so I'm not, I know that Phyllis sent it because we talked about it and I saw it come out. I think, does anybody need more time? Or has everybody gotten a chance to share back?
Good reminder. What days?
So then, I think that sounds fine. Just I want to make sure I'm clear on what the next steps are. So board members, today is Monday. Board members have maybe till Thursday. If you have not yet responded to the email that Phyllis sent, or she was requesting topics for the addendum, maybe then Phyllis, once you have everybody's towards you or Pat towards the end of this week, you can send that list to the superintendent. And then maybe we could get this on an agenda for us to talk about, and we can look at all of the topics that folks are sharing. Dr. Moffitt.
So I did submit my questions, and Superintendent Wright was able to get a response from Metro. For me, it was clarifying from them directly. And so I requested this about a month ago because I thought that we were going to have them come and we could ask about what they sent, and what you provided was just data. It wasn't really very clear. And you said that you got it at the end of the year, but the contract says that they're supposed to be getting it to us regularly. So I just had some questions that I'd like answered directly from them, if possible, that we've been asking for. I know I've asked them multiple times this year, and they haven't been able to get it. And if they can't provide that information, then they surely need to tell us that they can't, and then we need to make another addendum to the addendum. But I think to speak to them directly is my ask. And my questions really have already been submitted. Phyllis, you did a great job at compiling them, so it is now to get clarification from them directly, and that was my ask about a month ago.
I just want to make sure I'm following all the sequence of events. My understanding is that the questions that you had shared, the superintendent shared directly, and then sent directly their response back to you.
I was under the impression that the process was followed to send the responses back to everyone because they were Metro questions. I sent my responses.
That's right. I think we're saying the same thing, but that there's the challenge that I'm having, and would welcome perspective from others. And I think Mrs. Weinberg, this will get to your perspective, to your question too, about having them come in. We can certainly have them come into a meeting. I think the thing I'm always balancing is the other things we also have on our agenda and when we would do this. I think, and I feel torn because on the one hand, I feel like they've been responding and saying they don't have the things we're asking for. We could create time for them to tell us that in person. But as I look at what we have teed up for the 17th, I think there'll be meetings like tonight where it's almost 9 o'clock and we're still going. So if it's, I'm open, and if people would like them to come in, let's do it. But I'm torn because I think they've also responded already, and they've already shared that they don't have things we're asking for. I also could be wrong.
Okay, so let me finish my sentence because you interrupted me. So I submitted questions in part that we've asked as a board, not just Kareem questions. And some of the information that was supplied wasn't very clear. Some of the things that were supplied were around questions about the MOU that needed to be signed by May the 30th. So it was asking questions about that as well. It is now going to be July. So while some of that may or may not be applicable, I had questions in addition to other board members around Metro processes, all of that. And so it wasn't, my request wasn't just because they'd already answered them, it was to get clarification on what they were actually providing. So if you're saying that we don't have time until maybe July or August, can you share with me what the process would be if a board member has questions around specifically an MOU and getting data back, time, particularly when there's a deadline of the MOU and the contracts? Because I want to understand. I think that the information was shared back to everybody, and I did say at that time, which is a month ago, that I still had questions for clarity. So I just want to understand what the process is so that I'm not consistently asking the same information and not getting any clarity or any response back. I understand time. I'm sitting here in this meeting too. I understand time, but I want to understand how to get the answers to my questions from administration, from you. I want to understand what that process is going to be. So if you could just share me, what do I need to do to get more clarity? Because I can't call them directly. I can't speak to them directly to ask them. I'm asking my question. I have more questions. So just share with me what that needs to be.
I appreciate the question. We'll figure it out because I think I was operating under the assumption that they'd already responded, but I might be missing something too. Superintendent?
So just a couple points of clarity. So Metro provides ridership information to us that goes into our dashboard monthly. That is accurate. So on a monthly basis, we do know what students, we don't like the format that it's in because it shows student numbers. So it's not as easy to drill into who those kids are. And I think that that's a documentation that Board Member Moffitt is referencing, but we do get information that comes from them. The complete cross-reference for students for the entire year, we don't get until after the school year is closed. So I just wanted to make sure that I added that clarification because I don't want to say they don't give us information. They do. That's how we get our ridership. That's how we get our on-time numbers. All of that information is information that's provided on a monthly basis. I think the second part of the question, initially we received questions from Board Member Moffitt that the questions, many of the questions were also about some of the apps and other resources that Metro could be doing. That was filtered. So I took that information, shared that information back as Metro provided it to me. There was still not clarity, so then I took the questions specifically and sent them back to Metro for Metro to answer those questions specifically and share them with the board. What my response was it's a matter of just letting us know when, if it's the will of the board for Metro to come and answer those same questions. We just have to set it up with them so that they are able to do that if we think that that's something that they would need to do. They're willing to do that. I don't know if the answer would be different, but they're willing to do that if that's what we're looking to do. I thought the interim to that, or the next from that, was the conversation about what needs to go in the shared information that Board Member Bolton referenced for us to look at the addendum. So it seems like maybe there are two things that we're looking at now. We're looking at one, the questions that might still be left, and then two, the addendum, the statements that would need to come from the board that the board would like us to reference as we're working through the additional MOU or the addendum that we're looking for, because this is not, we're not in a contract year with them. This would be us updating the MOU or the agreement that we have with them. So that's the way that I am understanding it, but whatever the will of the board is, we're able to do that in terms of what the next steps need to be.
And in all, and
Thank you, Superintendent. Dr. Moffitt?
you absolutely, your last email to President Lindy was, let me know a date that you would have like them to come in compliance with what I asked for. So again, I asked a month ago, and you did say that you coordinate that meeting. So I would like to understand what the process is so that I can get clarification of my questions and not be still here a month and a half later. Because you absolutely did offer to coordinate that meeting.
Thanks, Dr. Moffitt. I think if the board would like to have Metro come into a meeting, we can certainly do that. I think I would just defer to whatever the majority of board members would like to do, and often if there's a committee, something to get assigned to so that they could spend more time Getting into questions, we could also go that route, but truly, I think whatever the majority of the board would like to do is what we'll do. Would people like us to invite Metro to come to a board meeting? Ms. Bolden?
I think if we, first and foremost, I know Moffett has a list of questions and the information. Maybe we attach some of these other questions and information requests or what have you to that list, and the whole board has in front of them all of the questions and issues that we've come up together with or individually. And we have some Metro questions, and some of them the superintendent and treasurer maybe answer some of them, and some of them has to be with Metro. And then I would say that certainly, wouldn't be a bad idea to have a Metro presentation as to their planning for the coming year. And certainly even before that, it's probably when you all have to be negotiating or discussing the addendum. So I think there's three parallel things happening. So questions that need to be answered. And there's this, the addendum negotiations in quotes. And then there is maybe Metro's transportation plan for the coming school year. And maybe preceding that, there's questions that we would ask them on live here to explain to it. It's not just answers, some of it's explanation and them saying publicly what is happening, because I know that helped 2 years ago a little bit.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Mrs. Weinberg?
I would just agree with Board Member Bolden. I think we should have them come.
That sounds great. So if we were to target then, this is going to take some time, I think, to get these pieces together. And I think I also hear that people want to do it before school starts. So if that things are true, my recommendation would be to be on the next business meeting. It's 2 business meetings from now. Any concerns with us doing so? Mrs. Weinberg?
Can you repeat that last part?
Sure. I would be happy to repeat the last part. What I was saying is, it sounds like that there are a number of, certainly majority of folks who would like to have Metro come and respond to a series of things. So my next thought is, when should we do that? I think it'll take a little bit of time to get things together based on the last part of this conversation. And I also think we want to do it before school starts. So that was leading me to want to start at the August 7th meeting, not the July 17th meeting. So that's 2 business meetings from now, not the next one. Any questions, concerns, dissents? Okay, sounds good. Moving on to our last board matters item from Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy. So as in the minutes for policy, as promised earlier, I'd return. This is the third thing we talked about. So the policy minutes actually took like an hour and a half tonight to get to. But the third thing we talked about, Ms. Weinberg brought up in other business, was the naming of schools. Since we have the new property that Bill Collins talked about in Madisonville. And so Ms. Weinberg's question was essentially what's the process for naming schools, and it is sit down because this is a long explanation. We do it. That's it. And so what we have to do is essentially figure out how we want to do it. Our recommendation as a committee is that we incorporate community feedback, input, take it to the community, how that looks. Our community engagement team can design that, whatever that needs to be. One thing that did come at a discussion item that we wanted to pass along was that we are, while we have done probably the best job in the state, I think we can say that, of showing equity racially in the naming of our buildings. We have numerous buildings named after Black leaders from the community. Most all of our buildings are named after people. We are woefully underrepresented in buildings named after women. And, we have a couple. That's Taylor, Spencer, Hayes Porter. Jenny Porter, of course, that one's near and dear to me, is James Morosky will be there in about a month or 2. And he will learn all about Jenny Porter. But Miss Porter, in addition to being the first Black person ever to receive a PhD from the University of Cincinnati, she was also the first Black woman to be the principal of a school in Cincinnati. And I'm just going to hand it over to Ms. Weinberg. We're not suggesting this be the name of the school, but we thought it was interesting. We are recommending heavily that the school be named after a woman. Obviously, we want community input, but Ms. Weinberg, if you want to finish our fun fact that we discovered that she was the principal of what school?
I think I forgot this one.
He was principal of the Harriet Beecher Stowe School.
Yes, thank you.
And which doesn't exist, Harriet Beecher Stowe. And it's funny, the reason this is funny, Morgan and I were talking before the meeting, like, why is there nothing named after Harriet Beecher Stowe? I was like, talking about Jenny Porter, and she goes, you know, the school Jenny Porter was the principal of. So anyway, the point is there are a lot of women we could name our schools. We just want to put that out there, get the ball rolling, get the board fired up about the possibility of naming this school and assigning to the administration, which I will do formally, to get into the community and start getting that feedback input.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Ms. Bolden.
Yes, and as I often say, all the women, all schools that carry women's names, they have the name next to a man. There's not single women. One, that's my history lesson, I believe true. So the reality is that we also have a number of schools as we get ready for our bicentennial. We also have a number of schools that are named for streets. Now that's very inspiring, of course. It says nothing about the history. So, I mean, there's a real opportunity here to do some great stuff in preparation for bicentennial. So I look forward to that. And I know, I'll say it again, even though he happens to be a Caucasian male, I do still think that there is a need in one of our lanes to be named for Governor Gilligan. And we'll put that in the hat. Well.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Mrs. Blumberg.
And while we are talking about obviously names of schools, I know there was a discussion that came up in regards to Lighthouse, and I think this was before my time on the board. Since being on the board, it has come up, and I think that we should possibly discuss that as a next step.
Thank you, Ms. Blumberg. Ms. Morosky.
And conveniently, it's two assignments in one because it's the same community where the building is housed. So,
any other last comments on the naming schools? Thank you, Mr. Morosky. So we are now moving towards the end here. Are there any inquiries or updates from any board members this evening?
President Lynn.
Ms. Jones.
Yes, I do have one very short update. The OSBA is advertising. They have posted an announcement about their upcoming committee assignments, nominations, and it never aligns with our organizational meeting. So I wanted to make sure that board members understood that if they have any interest in being considered for nominations of various OSBA committees, they should look at it and respond by June 30th. I believe that Ms. Davis sent an email to that effect on June 8th. So you might want to revisit that or revisit their website. Now, the second thing regarding that is we probably already have board members that are on some of these committees and their terms may not end. So in that situation, you don't have to worry about resubmitting your nomination. But if it's a new committee where the seat is open and you want to get your name on the list, I would suggest you do that. And then the board would formalize that if your nomination is accepted, and the board will formalize that at the organizational meeting. So wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Other inquiries, dates? I have a couple. I'd like to go first. Mr.